All right, we're live. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be looking at an early medieval polemical work by Ibn Qayyim. When we look at it, we kind of see some familiar arguments. We kind of see the root of the Muslim arguments against Christianity. Then we also see some bizarre stuff that thankfully is no longer part of the Islamic polemics against Christianity. So it should be really interesting, really informative. Today I have with me Lloyd and Io from the Third Apology. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute, but first let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with fellow Christians and non-Christians around the world. We ask that anyone listening today, whether they are Christian or not, get something valuable out of this. We ask that any Muslims listening approach this material with an open mind, that they begin to see the depravity of the religion and come home to the true love that only you can provide. We ask that you be with us and you guide our discussion today. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
As I said, we have Lloyd and Io with us today. Of course, most of you are probably fairly familiar with Lloyd since he's been on a number of times, but I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Hi there, everyone. Lloyd de Jong, South African. Thaddeus has been kind enough to allow me on his channel. And as you know, I research Islam. I read the major scholars of Islam, those people who wrote the tafsir. I also read the Sharia, and of course the Sirah, the biographies of Muhammad, which extend well beyond what you define in both the Quran and the Hadith. In fact, these are the context of the Quran, and the Sharia itself and the resultant fiqh, or the exegesis of the law of Islam. These things are the bedrock of Islam. These are the final word, the authority within Islam, and provide the detail that the Quran lacks. And the biographies obviously give context, give a timeline, give a chronological order to the Sunnah. And this provides far more detail to Islam. In fact, if you become a Muslim imam or a judge, you have to learn these things. You spend 5 to 7 years studying this formally at university. So this is what I've learned. I lived 10 years in the Middle East, learned a great deal, traveled through the culture. I've been to maybe 20 Islamic countries. And today we'll be discussing the roots of the Islamic polemics against Christianity, the hatred, the doctrinal hatred of Christianity and the Bible. And hopefully we'll start to clarify the sources, and one of those major sources is Ibn Qayyim, whom we'll be discussing today.
Thank you for that. And we also have with us Io. I had an interview with him last week, but this will just be his second time on the channel. So if you haven't checked out the interview with him, you can check that out to get to know him a little better. But go ahead and introduce yourself briefly today.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Io. I run a YouTube channel called The Third Apology. I've been into apologetics since I was about 13, and I'm 20 now. So it's been a part of me for a good while. And I've more recently been looking at Islam and trying to reach out to more Muslims just because I recognize the great need there. Nowhere near Lloyd's level, but he was gracious enough to invite me on today and just kind of provide my reaction and feedback to the slides and the presentation that he's going to give today surrounding, as he said, early Islamic polemics against Christianity and where we see the roots of this, not just ideology, but this attitude that we see towards Jews and Christians. And so it's going to be a good talk. I'm excited to learn from him as well as give my 2 cents. And I hope you all are willing to do the same. Thank you.
Excellent. And the links to both Lloyd and Io's channels are in the video description box, so check those out. Hopefully most of you know who I am. I am Thaddeus. I've been doing Christian apologetics for about 20 years, 20, maybe as much as 25 years. Recently, I was very content just talking to people one-on-one, maybe writing some articles, writing materials. Very much not a natural extrovert, very much not the kind of person who would see myself starting a YouTube channel, but the Lord had other plans for me. And here I am. I've been doing this for about 1.5 years now, and very pleased to see the channel growing. Just one more note, had a couple comments on recent videos that my volume was a little low compared to other people. I went ahead and bumped that up. So Hopefully that is better today, but if I sound too loud, just let me know in the chat. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive into the presentation.
All right, so I shall share my screen. You've disabled?
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Turned off by default. I have to turn it on, and I don't always remember. All right, you can share now.
Let's hope I have the right screen. Yes, I do. Let's give it a moment to come up.
Awesome.
Okay, the screen should be up by now. So we're going to go through some slides from the book Guidance to the Uncertain in Reply to the Jews and the Nazarenes by Ibn Qayyim. There are three major scholars in Islam who formulated and made doctrine the polemics against Christianity. These would be Ibn Hazm, Ibn Qayyim, and Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Hazm was the first. However, much of his work has not been translated. You'll find only pieces, snippets of it in university theses and so on. However, Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah each wrote a book. Each of these books is available in PDF format for download, and I've read them both. So we'll be going through Ibn Qayyim's book, and you'll find lots of this content being used, as Thaddeus said, by Muslims today. Right, note that I am utilizing the new corrected edition. So this is by Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah and translated by Abdul-Hayy al-Masri. Of course, these are Muslims, so these are from people who are not looking to distort the text or to abuse it in any way so that we misrepresent what's there. So this is Ibn Qayyim. He's a famous Islamic scholar, and he's an anti-Christian Islamic polemicist. And of course, he's a scholar of Islam, and we're going to be doing an introduction to the mandated, and this is mandated Islamic hatred of the Bible and Christianity. Any questions or comments before I go, guys?
Nope, just looking forward to what you have to present.
Okay, so let's have a look. This is a book by a man called M.A.C. Cave, the series of prophetics in the Bible for the advent of Muhammad. Books like this in Islam are far more common than we would realize. Muslim scholars have been claiming in literature that Muhammad is prophesied in the Bible and Muhammad is the final prophet. And in fact, if we go deeper into the biographies, the Sirah, you'll find that they claim that Muhammad is Jesus, is really the Messiah. He is the one that we've all been waiting for. For instance, they take Malachi 3:1, behold, I send my messenger to prepare the way before me, right? And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. So they claim, and they have claimed, and they've been teaching this, don't forget, in their dawah, they've been teaching this in their madrasas, they've been teaching this in their mosques, that the Bible speaks of Muhammad. So let's look at the source of some of these ideas. But before we get there, this is a conversation I had last week. Someone told me, you mock Islam, you should stop doing so. And I said, no, I accurately represent what the scholars write, what's in the books. And then I pasted this. I said, Ibn Qayyim on Christians, the prayer of the Nazarenes ridicules the worshipped deity. So when we pray, we ridicule God. They chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted and ascetic amongst them would consider it no great matter if he happens to have passed urine dripping on his thighs and legs. This is during the Mass. They claim that we would consider it no issue if we literally urinated in our pants on the bench during our church Mass. And of course, this is symbolic in Islam because when urine touches your body, you will go to hell. It is considered a grave sin in Islam. So I said to this person, your top scholars say Christians would pray while taking a pee in the benches at church, in their pants, urine dripping down the bench. And they said, hey, that's funny. And I said, you tell me I'm mocking? I said, you just did it. And they said, just kidding, I was just pulling your leg. And I said, really? I said, Qayyim wasn't kidding. You should read his book. Did I misunderstand what he said? And they said, you certainly have misunderstood it. That I can definitely say. I will explain the deeper meaning to it when I have a bit more time. Ciao. And that was their last word, and I haven't heard from them since.
Wow. It is.
So, yeah. Any comments before I go?
Yeah. Before you go further, I just wanted to comment how it was quite surprising to me when I started looking at Islam, how often and how much Muslims talk about Christianity like in their own circles.
Mhm.
It's just weird to me because, growing up in the church, I never heard more than like a couple words about Islam ever mentioned. And 20, 40 years of attending church services, maybe like 3 times ever Islam's been mentioned. And that was like something like, the Muslim terrorists are in the news, we need to be praying for them to come to salvation type thing. It wasn't, but then you look at the Muslim sources and they're like obsessed with Christianity. It's just really weird to me.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think something interesting to notice here, despite how short the exchange was, is that you obviously see this clear contrast of evidence, facts, logic, and just clear emotion. I mean, obviously, this person could have come back to you and given a response, using sources or whatever they want to try and do. But I mean, from your own experience, they haven't done that yet. And so just looking at this immediate exchange, you see how Lloyd presents the arguments. You see how he's not just giving his own conjecture or his own opinion, but he's just merely quoting what Ibn Qayyim has said. And rather than considering what the person said, they simply just default to what they've been taught and then assume that they'll be able to figure it out later. But I'm guessing that person wasn't able to because they haven't even reached back out yet. So very interesting just to see that kind of like, almost kind of like a wind up response, like a wind up toy that you just program. It's very interesting.
Agreed. I think Thaddeus, you'd agree with that statement, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. So we got a couple comments from the chat here. First, Atem Yak, who I've never seen before. I don't know if he's sympathetic to Muslim causes or is a Muslim or not, but he said that Muslims talk about Christianity because there are 2.3 billion Christians. Christianity is a big business for them. Well, yeah, maybe, but there are billions. There are more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, and Muslims also talk a lot about Judaism, and there's barely any Jews. So I don't think that that's in and of itself is a sufficient explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on that point, I constantly get told that the Shia aren't Muslims, that this sect isn't Muslims, these people are sectarians, those people are sectarians, that group's not Muslims. So are there really 1.6 billion Muslims?
Yeah. And I mean, technically you could argue that there are 1.6 billion apostates because many of them don't uphold the preservation of the scriptures and things like that, which are fundamental to the ideology. And yet, it's just insane how it's just become a kind of dogma that you don't have to kind of maintain those things. So who even really knows? But I mean, that's a great point, Lloyd. There's so much division. They paint themselves as if it's us against them, and there's just this entire amount of unity on one side. But when you look beneath the surface, it's really not the case.
Yeah, I agree. That's something we should cover in another show as well. Thaddeus and I discussed some of that. So I'll move forward a slide.
Well, hold on. Before you go forward, a little while ago, the Hornet asked, where is the temple concept in Islam? Because that Malachi quote talked about the temple. So you're an expert on Islam. Have you seen any temple language in Islam, or are they just ignoring that part of the verse entirely when they say it's about Muhammad?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the concept, but where is temple concept? It's not about the place, because remember, mosques are bare, barren places. It's really any place becomes a mosque. You can pray anywhere. So it's really about obedience to Muhammad. And in the Sharia, Muhammad and Allah are synonymous. In fact, it literally says that Muhammad is synonymous with Allah as the lawgiver. So really, it's also, you're not supposed to, for instance, build a temple. The only time they use temple really in context that I know of in Islam is when they speak of Muhammad said, do not be like the Christians and the Jews who built temples over the graves of their prophets. Of course, they built a temple over the grave of Muhammad. So you tell me.
It's a mosque, though. It's not a temple. Completely different.
Well, yeah.
You're pushing. Right. You're pushing. I don't know.
So this is an English translation of Ibn al-Qayyim's Hidayat al-Hayara fi something. Yeah. Okay. So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya replies to the apparent attacks made by the Jews and the Christians towards the pure deen of Islam do not translate the word deen just as the word religion. We will for convenience sake, but it is not. Deen would be a show in of itself, or at least a 10-minute explanation, which we will not go into. All right. So he apparently, according to the author, the translator, he turns the arguments against them and exposes their contradictory statements. He exposes their irrational beliefs and practices and poetically describes their miserable state. So this is the foreword from the translator. Also, this book is incidentally a reply to those modernists who view the Al-Kitab, the people of the book, as our brothers. So he warns Muslims not to accept Jews and Christians as our brothers, those who water down the pure creed of al-wala wal-bara for worldly gain. May Allah keep us safe and sound from such deviation in belief. So we have an interesting term there, al-wala wal-bara, and I'm going to step forward and we're going to talk about what that is. Any questions before we go?
So this was from the translator's introduction?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's yeah. I'll be covering, because I'll be doing some housekeeping just to introduce the book, talk about the translate, make sure that we start on a clean slate. So, al-wala wal-bara, this is worth explaining. This is hating for Allah. So it literally translates as loyalty and disavowal, loving and hating for the sake of Allah, right? It is doing all that is pleasing to Allah and opposing what is displeasing to Allah. And you're opposing them for their calling towards something other than submission to Allah, whether on purpose or by nature of disbelief. All right, you guys can stop at any time if you need to say anything or add anything.
Yeah.
Loving for the sake of Allah means to love Allah and to show loyalty to Him by following the Sharia. It means to love all that is good and permissible in the Quran and the Sunnah. This type of love requires one to defend Allah's deen and to preserve it. It is to love those who are obedient to Allah and defend and assist them. Hating for the sake of Allah signifies showing anger towards those who oppose Allah, His messenger, His deen, and to the Muslims. Any comments?
Yeah, we see a strong contrast between Islam and Christianity here, that in Christianity, when someone does something wrong to us, we are called to love them, whereas in Islam, you're called to hate those who first hate you, or really just anyone who's not a Muslim.
One thing I want to actually point, go ahead, Lloyd.
No, go ahead, please, no, it's fine.
I was just going to say one thing I wanted to add on in relation to that is this, it's more of a philosophical point, but it is something I think which has major implications, and that is the idea of God being this maximally great being, in one essence, and in one essence that would be an all-loving being. But while we see that in the Bible, where Jesus says, love your enemies and all these things, we see that character displayed throughout its entirety. With the Quran, with the Hadith, we see constantly how Allah only loves those who love Him first, how He only gives favor to those who are first, on His side, so to speak. And so you definitely see this kind of favoritism going on, which from a philosophical standpoint would make it hard to attest that Allah is this idea of the greatest or the maximally most loving being out there. In a sense, Christians are more loving than Allah, which means that in one way we are greater than Allah, which means that Allah could not be God. And so kind of more philosophical, but definitely an interesting thing to notice here, especially when you see it pointed out with al-wala wal-bara, pronouncing that.
No, true. Also, when they say that they have to oppose those who go against, right, or those who attack Islam, just not being a Muslim means you are defying and attacking Allah and Islam. So we have to be careful how they interpret these words. Right. So in the foreword, the author spent 2.5 years, he says, to translate it with the assistance of a Dr. Muhammad Badawi. Right. So the Latin literature abounds with misconceptions about Islam, formulated out of sheer ignorance, out of malice, out of pride and prejudice, and religious fanaticism, but mostly out of fear of an alien religion emerging from the Sahara Desert, proclaiming Moses's oneness of God, teaching agnostic ideas that the established church had fought fiercely against, right, and not without atrocious bloodshed, and Islam confuting the established creed of the deity of the Messiah. So it brings about a set of teachings reminiscent of Judaism, and takes by surprise all the countries near and beyond its borders with conquest. So now, Ibn Qayyim says that essentially that Muhammad is taking the law of Moses, taking it one step further. It destroys the idea of the deity of Jesus, and it took by surprise all the countries near and beyond its borders with conquest, because Islam is a religion of peace, as we know. Then he says that the rest of the countries, okay, so relentlessly ferocious campaigns of accusations, denigrations, defamations, and blind demonization. So basically, they are victims. They're stating that Islam is always the victim, Muslims are always the victim, they are always being accused falsely. And they speak of that we talk about a distorted version of Islam, disparaging the religion and the person of the revered prophet in a way so offensive that it falls heavily on the hearing of any Muslim, right? And they speak of we use diatribes to blah, blah, blah. And they speak of the depth of the ignorance in the psyche of Middle Ages Christendom, right? And they say in comparison, in the edition of Ibn al-Jawziyah's book, I came across to translate similar ills of writing are found. There were many printing mistakes and a chaotic myriad of punctuation. The author did not reference these quotations from the Bible and the Torah. And this is something that is common in many of these books. They do not, Thaddeus, you've seen that as well. They don't give correct citations, often wrong. And sometimes they mash together different verses to make up brand new Bible verses. Some of the quotations from the Quran carried the wrong verse number. We've seen that with Bilal Phillips, which he corrected. And this book contains many spelling mistakes, and I found no easy way to follow the author's ideas of chaptering his work. So he's saying that basically Ibn Qayyim's book was a mess, and he had to try and clean this up. And this is one of the finest scholars of Islam. Any thoughts from you guys?
I mean, I want to just say, first and foremost, that it's interesting to see how, because, you know, the point of this presentation is to see how we can see the roots of what goes on today within these scholars. But, you know, what I've noticed is that a lot of times when these Muslims don't understand the arguments that we're making, or they just flat out oppose it, they're very quick to just default to the label of Islamophobia, which is basically what you see in this forward here, you know, where it's basically written off as, oh, you know, they're just Christendom, they don't understand this religion coming out of the Sahara Desert and all these things, rather than actually engaging again with the arguments themselves. It really goes back to the very brief text conversation that you had as well. You know, there's no engagement. It's all just about writing people off with some label as if that removes the issues. You know, if I can just write you off as an Islamophobe, then I don't have to deal with the arguments that you present. But unfortunately, you know, as evidenced by what we're doing here, that's not going to work. They're not going to get out of it that easily. And right. Because of that, often when they're quick to just use labels, their scholarship suffers as a result. So that's why you see the book is a mess. That's why you see the citations are off, because they're so used to just defaulting to labeling that they never actually learn to engage, study, and, you know, use polemics, use apologetics, or whatever they need to defend their ideology.
Right.
Yeah, we see it in comments that people just copy and paste something and they don't care if it has errors, spelling mistakes. One particular Muslim who used to comment on my channel all the time, multiple people pointed out that his copy and paste didn't contain the verse numbers. It accidentally had like an @ symbol instead of the number 2. And he just kept copying and pasting it anyway. He didn't care that people pointed out that it didn't even make any sense. He's like, oh, copy, paste, copy, paste. Can't think, just copy, paste.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but their arguments are pre-baked and just delivered, you know. So, yeah, let's continue with this. So, from the translator, according to some well-founded Islamic authorities, the translation of the Quran to any language is unlawful because it was sent down to Muhammad in the eloquence and connotation of Arabic. No other language can possibly convey the exact meanings intended. So because the Quran is the word of God, any attempt to translate it to a different language is inherently faulty, resulting in something totally different. This is a common argument. In my opinion, the translation of any text from one language to another is an attempt of conveyance, not of reproduction. So I found no way to convey to the English reader the quoted verses, blah, blah, other than referring to an already published translation by Abdullah Yusuf Ali, published by the Islamic Propagation Center International in South Africa. And that is the forward by the translator. So just a couple of interesting points that within Islam, there are those who think that the translation of the Quran is unlawful. So yeah, it seems that Allah still cannot speak English. A little bit about Ibn Qayyim. So we have this man with this really crazy name, died in the year 1350, right? So he's commonly known as Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, the son of the principal of the school of Jawziyah, and often known as just Ibn Qayyim, son of the principal for short. He is known reverentially as Imam Ibn al-Qayyim in Sunni tradition. He was an important medieval Islamic jurist, a theologian, and spiritual writer belonging to the Hanbali school of Orthodox Sunni jurisprudence. He's regarded as one of the most important thinkers in Islam and is remembered as the foremost disciple and student of Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. There are approximately 25 major scholars of Islam through the 1400 years of Islam who have been given the honorific Sheikh al-Islam. Ibn Taymiyyah is one of them. Right, so that is a very, very high level of respect, someone who's incredibly well educated. Right, so he was a student of Sheikh Taymiyyah. They were imprisoned together in the citadel of Damascus in 1326, and numerous important Muslim scholars of the Mamluk period were among Ibn Qayyim's students or influenced by him, including Ibn Kathir. Right, and he's considered very popular amongst the Salafis in the Wahhabist movement, so Orthodox. Now, he said a person's tongue can give you the taste of his heart. And we're going to start seeing in this episode just what came off his tongue, because if that is the case, then he had a very black heart. So let's talk about Ibn Kathir.
Yeah,
Ibn Kathir is
before you jump into his work. So, you know, we're talking about a really important scholar of Islam here, someone really respected, you know, on much higher authority than, say, someone in the YouTube comments.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Possibly. There's a small chance of that. Yeah, I wanted to establish his credentials before we go so that we understand we're dealing with some of the top scholars of Islam.
You'll likely still have someone who's like, oh, you know, that guy's a nobody, but they might have tuned in later or whatever. So as long as we can just establish that now, you know, the air's been cleared. Cool.
Yeah. So Ibn Kathir, right, let's talk a little bit about him. Lived from 1300 to 1373, was a highly influential Islamic historian, exegete, and scholar during the Mamluk era in Syria. He also remembered over 100,000 hadith, which there's a title for that, for someone who's memorized that many hadith, and it makes you one of the top scholars in history. He's an expert on tafsir, or Quranic exegesis, and the Fiqh, the jurisprudence. He wrote several books, including a 14-volume history of Islam. Right? Ibn Kathir wrote a famous commentary on the Quran named Tafsir al-Quran, which linked certain hadith or sayings of Muhammad and sayings of the Sahaba, his companions, to verses of the Quran in explanation. And many Sunni Muslims hold Kathir's commentary as the best after Tafsir al-Tabari. So the tafsir are the commentaries on the Quran by the major scholars of Islam, and they go into much detail explaining those verses, like the biblical commentaries we have today. He's very highly regarded, especially amongst the Salafis. And he wrote a book commissioned by the governor of Damascus as a defense of armed jihad against the neighboring Christian powers, such as the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia, based on the evidence of the Quran and the Sunnah, because Islam's a religion of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Ibn Kathir stated that Ibn Qayyim was the most affectionate person. He was never envious of anyone, nor did he hurt anyone. He never disgraced anyone, nor did he hate anyone. I do not know in this world in our time someone who's more dedicated to acts of devotion. Well, considering that al-wala wal-bara is one of the concepts he spoke of, then he did hate people. But
that's kind of like a criminal saying that guy's a pretty good person. It's like a useless endorsement there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So Ibn Rajab, one of Qayyim's students, stated that although he was by no means infallible, no one could compete with him in the understanding of the texts. Right. Ibn Rajab authored a work called the Fath al-Bari, but died before completion. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani began his famous commentary on Sahih Bukhari and gave his own work the same title in honor of Ibn Rajab. Now, Sahih Bukhari is, of course, the prime collection of the Hadith, and the Asqalani wrote the Fath al-Bari, which is the major commentary on Bukhari's work. Okay, so these are major scholars. So I wanted to be clear with everyone that we're not pulling up some random scholar. These are top scholars, and he's endorsed by other top scholars. So, oh Christ worshippers, we want an answer. So I'll pause there for a moment for you guys. Anything?
Oh, no, that was great. Excellent.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
I think you made your point well that, we're
Mhm.
looking at some of the most authoritative figures in Islamic scholarship. We're not just looking at even a random imam or something, let alone appealing to random books like we see Muslims do in the YouTube comments that they'll copy and paste from some random book no one's ever heard of that was they no doubt found because it was on an internet archive or whatever, since it's in public domain. But they copy and paste from some book written in the 1800s by a random no-name preacher and like, oh, this is what Christianity teaches. And we're definitely not doing something like that here.
Right. Yeah, I do try to be as accurate as possible. I'm not trying to offend, but I am trying to be correct. And we're as accurate as we can be in terms of the scholarship. So what Qayyim is most known for is a poem against Christianity. It's called "O Christ Worshippers, We Want an Answer." They call it a Qasida, which refutes Christianity. So Qayyim hated Christians. He hated Christianity. However, this position is now established as Islamic orthodoxy, and it is fully aligned with the Sharia of Muhammad. Right? If you've watched some of the previous shows, we've discussed what the Sharia formally dictates about Christianity, Jesus, and Christians in detail. He also hated the Jews, and he hated Judaism. So few know that this poem, vilifying Christianity, is the basis of many arguments by Islamic apologists today. It is actually fundamental to what people, I see a little typo there, I'll remove that later. So Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a similar polemic work, also quoted routinely today, and his ideas, he was even more influential than Ibn Qayyim, and his ideas have been incorporated into the Islamic Sharia. So let's go through the poem. O Christ worshippers, we want an answer to our question from your wise ones. If the Lord was murdered by some people's act, what kind of God is this? We wonder, was he pleased by what they did to him? If yes, blessed be they achieved his pleasure. But if he was discontented, this means their power had subjugated him. Was the whole entity, the whole of the world, left without a sustainer? So who answered the prayers? Pause there for your commentary.
Thaddeus, I'll let you go first.
Sure. We're going to see over and over again that basically everything he says can simply be answered. We believe in the Trinity, not a unity. So, if you have a Unitarian view of God, well, then, yeah, it is a real problem that God's body died on the cross because, there's only one person of God and apparently he's dead. But when you have a Trinity, you have the three persons in the one Godhead, and, all these things make perfect sense. Like, same thing with, there being no sustainer for the universe. Well, if God in his entirety and came in and lived, dwelt among the earth, that would be a problem. But he doesn't. That's not what we believe. So it's just a total misrepresentation of Christian beliefs.
Yeah, it forsakes the idea of, and I know a lot of Muslims have a hard time understanding this, but it also forsakes the idea of Christ having two natures, right? So when he was on that cross, it was the human side of him which died. It wasn't like his spiritual divinity ceased to exist, because we know that for 3 days he was giving the proclamation. So it completely forsakes that. And then up top, when it talks about, it tries to create this dilemma about God being murdered and how if he wanted it, then, what kind of God is this? But then if he didn't, then he didn't have control. We completely forget that while him dying on the cross and being crucified was ultimately the Father's will, that doesn't mean that he reveled in the act itself, right? You can have a will and still be upset about the actions which were required on the part of free humans to get there. For example, Joseph in the Old Testament, it was God's will that he would rule over Egypt and be able to help save the nations from the famine. But just because that happened, that doesn't mean that God was okay with his brother selling him into slavery, for example, right? You can have that end game and not in the process condone everything that happens along the way. You can use those things to ultimately bring about that good, but to then say that it's a kind of take it or leave it idea is really just setting up a false dilemma.
Yeah, on that, Jesus is not the Father.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different aspect of the Godhead. But also, when they call Jesus the Son of Man, it means he was a member of humanity, right? So, which means that Yahweh could enter the world, and he entered the world through the form of Jesus. Whereas what's interesting is in Islam, Allah does not and cannot enter the world. However, what's crazy is that Satan can enter the world. Satan is more powerful than Allah.
Yeah.
Which, so these are some interesting, as you mentioned earlier, philosophical questions. So yeah, shall we continue?
Yep.
Yeah. Good stuff so far, man.
Were the heavens vacated when he laid under the ground somewhere? Were all the worlds left without a God to manage while his hands were nailed? Why did not the angels help him when they heard him while he wailed? How could the rods stand to bear the true Lord when he was fastened? How could the irons reach him and had his body pinned? How could his enemies' hands reach him and slap his rear? I'll pause for your commentary.
Yeah, so obviously a bit of disrespect there with that last line, but we'll let that slide or whatever. It's interesting again, because when I started hearing these type of objections, the first thing my mind wants to do is to go back to Muhammad, right? So we have Muhammad being poisoned and his aorta feeling like it's being severed, which is supposed to indicate him being a false prophet. And yet, where was Allah to help him? A lot of these same critiques that they like to level against Jesus and Christianity are the very things that can be turned against them, even though this is what the scholar here was trying to do, ironically. And so, they're very quick to dish it out, but then the second we can turn it around on them, they realize that they have a bigger issue on their own hands. Just as you said, with Allah not entering into creation as another example. As Thaddeus said up top too, it's just a matter of, we don't believe in one person, one God. We believe in one God, three persons. So there's no issue regarding the heavens being vacated or, the world being left without a God. So already, and considering that this is the foundation for a lot of the Muslim polemics and apologetics today, they're on sinking. They're on a sinking ship. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of is totally ignoring that the cross had a purpose in Christian doctrine. He's like, he's kind of just thinking, well, this just happened, and there was no reason for it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Stickman Sam says, if Allah let humans corrupt his words 3 times, Torah, Zabur, and Injil, what kind of God is this? And I'll just point out that it's actually way more than 3 times. According to, the Hadith and such, there's like 170,000 prophets or something like that. And a good portion of those had books. Supposedly the book was revealed in every human language, and somehow only Arabic was not corrupted. It was revealed in, in every language. There's tens of thousands of human languages. So yeah, this is a God with a 99.999% failure rate, and apparently he's the creator of the universe.
Right. Yeah. And was Christ revived by himself, or was the reviver another God? What a sight it was, a grave that enclosed the gods. Stranger still is the belly that confined him, being born as a human. He stayed there for 9 months in utter darkness, fed by blood. Then he got out of the womb as a small baby, weak and gasping to be breastfed. He ate and drank and did what naturally resulted. In other words, urination and defecation. Is this what you call a God?
Man, so again, up top, and was Christ revived by himself, or was the reviver another God? Again, that comes back to the idea of God having 2 natures. So, and John 2:19, I think, is where he says that he'll raise himself. And yet we also see verses where it says that the Father raised him as well as the Holy Spirit. So we can see, and this is what my first video was about, like Thaddeus and I talked about in our interview. We can see how you have 3 different actors in this process who are raising Jesus's physical body. So again, it makes the mistake of assuming that Christ only had one nature. Thaddeus, I'll let you comment on the rest of it.
Yeah, and he tries to portray this as a weakness of Christianity, but we would view this as the strength that God lowered himself to our level because that's how much he cares about us. That's how much he loves us. This is the only way he could really manifest that love completely, was to come and live among us and be like us. And we see this in this argument in a less polite fashion and comments on my channel all the time, your God pooped, ha ha ha. Literally, they with the ha 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 part, and it's like, come on, people, are you an adult or are you a child? This isn't grade school. Let's come up with a real argument.
Yeah, he goes on, high exalted be Allah above the lies of Christians. All of them will be held accountable for their libels. When they say held accountable, they mean in this world and the next. Understand that? They mean you'll be held accountable at the hands of the Muslims.
Okay.
O cross worshippers, for what reason is this exalted and blame is cast upon those who reject it? Is it not logical to break and burn it, to break and burn the cross? Remember, ISIS had said that they want to break the cross, along with the one who innovated it. When they say innovated it, they mean Paul of Tarsus, the supposed founder of the Trinitarian faith. They claim regarding the falsification of the Bible and the message of Jesus. And also, when they speak of innovation, innovation in Islam is bid'ah. It is the reprehensible, illegal innovation. It is effectively blasphemy in Sharia. Right? Since the Lord was crucified on the cross and his hands were fastened to it, that is really a cursed cross to carry. So discard it. Do not kiss it. Just so, by the way, who goes around kissing the black stone?
Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah, it's interesting. Up there with that top line where it says all of them will be held accountable for their libels. Now, I don't know what the specifics the writer's referring to, but if it's the idea that, Christ was raised from the dead and all these things. Now, I understand there are multiple views on this, but from what I've seen, there is a pretty large consensus among Muslims that Allah actually made it appear as if Jesus was crucified, when in reality he wasn't, and he took him up to heaven. So in one sense, Allah is basically responsible for these libels, because in his omniscience, he should have known that him performing this act would have resulted in the onlookers and everyone else, up until even us now, believing that Christ was actually raised from the dead. But rather than telling them on the spot, he waited centuries later to then let them know, and basically drops a bomb that, hey, I'm responsible for one of the world's largest false religions being essentially created, because I performed an action that made everyone think that Christ really was raised from the dead, that he really was deity, and that he was who he said he was.
Well, Allah deceives everyone by making them think that Jesus died and Jesus was resurrected by deceiving people, and then he punishes them for believing the lie that he created.
Exactly.
Allah makes perfect sense. Yeah,
crazy stuff there. We had a comment from Tatunin, or phrased as a question: does Allah enjoy everything he does, like the flood and killing apostates? Kind of going back to that first slide there, where it was like, well, did God want to be killed or did he not want to be killed? Either way, he's kind of damned. But Tatunin's pointing out that the same thing could be said about the God of Islam. Either he enjoys killing people or he doesn't, and doesn't have any control over it, according to the logic of Ibn Qayyim.
And again, too, going a bit further down regarding the cross, Ibn Qayyim is having a hard time understanding that there was more than one motive at play regarding the cross. It wasn't just the Jews who wanted to kill Jesus and the Romans who ultimately did it, but again, it was God working behind the scenes to bring about salvation to the world. And so that's the reason we look to the cross and can rejoice over it, not because we like the fact that God had to go through that suffering, but because in spite of that suffering, he was able to bring about the greatest blessing the world has ever known. But obviously it's circular reasoning if Muslims already reject that, because then when they look at the cross, because they already reject that, all they're going to be able to see is Jesus being killed on this cross for no reason at all. And so then no wonder they think this way.
Right. And the Lord was abused on it, the cross, and you adore it. So it is clear that you are one of Allah's enemies. If you extol it because it carried the Lord of the worlds, why don't you prostrate yourself and worship graves, since the grave contained your God in it? So, Christ worshipper, open your eyes. This is the beginning and this is the end. So now, according to the Sharia, Christians are meant to follow Islam. Thus, worshipping at graves is forbidden. It is illegal in Islam. And one who is a Christian abhors the idea of worshipping a grave. How is it possible for them to worship the cross? Those are just the questions raised there. So yeah, final before we move on to the rest of it.
yeah, I'll just say, well, we don't worship the cross. That's a total misconception.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really as simple as that. You know, you can look upon something and have remembrance of the events surrounding it without bowing your head at it and, you know, worshiping and doing all these things. And even still, again, it ignores the ulterior motive behind it that the Father had in bringing salvation. So,
Right.
we're not off to a good start here.
Yeah. So, and then he writes a book about that. So, hopefully, you understand. We're starting to see that Islamic anti-Christian polemics are consistently derived from only a few Islamic scholars. Islamic apologists repeat these same flawed arguments. The basis of their anti-Christian, anti-Jesus views are learned in the madrasa from age 5. They continue this indoctrination with more detail at their mosques, in their dawah sessions, and the major sources are Ibn Hazm, Ibn Qayyim, and Ibn Taymiyyah. And these views, and we're going to study them in more depth and more detail, are normal orthodox Islamic doctrine in alignment with the Sharia. We've covered this in previous episodes, so I'm happy to do them in future episodes. We just don't have the time to do them in detail right now, but we're going to talk a little bit about them. Any comments before I now go on with the book itself, as I get into the book?
I have a question for you, Lloyd. You spent a good amount of time in the Middle East. Were Muslims in the Middle East very hostile to Christianity, or were they like the Western Muslims who at least pretend to be friendly to Christians?
Depend, you know, you would come across those, except, of course, it was socially unacceptable and impolite company to display it. You get Muslims who wouldn't shake your hand because you were unclean, or wouldn't shake a woman's hand. If you went to the wrong area, you could start to feel, you know, things were getting uncomfortable. So it depended where you were. There were places where I would go where I'd be told, look, you go with your chaperone, or you don't leave the hotel, you don't go out, you could be kidnapped, you could be harmed. I was in northern Iraq one time, and interesting place that, but I've been to lots of interesting places. And I was told, I get off the plane, I get picked up by these dudes, and we go to get some lunch, and the first thing they tell me is, don't stare at the women, the men will beat you up.
Oh, wow.
You know,
that's interesting.
And yeah, so I mean, I've been to lots of places. So yeah, they are required to be polite to you because you're there legally, but there's a certain strain to it, certainly. You know, although then again, there are places where they're very, look, it depends on the person, right? The doctrine is fixed, but the person, I mean, there's some great Muslims. I've met some great Muslims. I've made some great friends. There are people I really like, who've great time with. So yeah, I mean, you know, there's some wonderful Muslims, certainly.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to always keep in mind, that what we're doing is critiquing Islam. We're not necessarily critiquing Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
It's especially hard for Muslims to see the difference, but what we're critiquing is the doctrine, the ideology. We're not necessarily saying every person who believes in this is a bad person or anything like that. In fact, I would say, you know, 99% of Muslims are probably better people than their God and prophet were. So,
well said.
So these are extracts from the book itself. So Allah decreed in us to submit to the Quran's teachings and obey its rules. Submit and obey. Okay, to hold firmly to its foundations, refrain from wrongdoing, which is defined in the Sharia, and keep close observance, okay, to its tenets and principles. For Islam is the religion that Allah set up and approved for all the prophets, all the messengers, and all the angels. Right? So all the prophets and all the messengers. Now, a messenger is a higher level of prophet. So you have Muhammad, who's a messenger, not just a normal prophet, right? And all the prophets and all the messengers throughout all religions were called to believe in Islam. And of course, no one except Muhammad heeded the call. Right. So do they seek for other than the religion of Allah? All creatures in heaven and earth have, willing or unwilling, bowed to his will. And to him, they shall all be brought back one way or another. That sounds like a threat. Right. Then he goes, so no other religion is acceptable. Don't forget, it says here that all of heaven is Muslim. Right. That's a claim that Islam makes. Among the former or the latter generations, no other religion is accepted from anyone. No compulsion in religion, of course, Quran 2:256, which is cancelled by Quran 3:85. If anyone desires a religion other than Islam, which is submission to Allah, never will it be accepted of him.
Lloyd, quick question. Oh, yeah, quick question. So So on the previous slide, is that why you hear a lot of Muslims who say that you're born a Muslim, so to speak? Is this kind of
Yes.
like where this comes from? Yeah, it's very interesting to see how that goes, because when people, I guess, convert to Islam, they say, oh, well, you've always been a Muslim because of things
You
like this, because
revert.
of verses like this. Yeah.
Technically, you
But
revert to Islam.
yeah, you revert. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. But then when you have people like Nabil Qureshi, or a lot of ex-Muslims on YouTube, they'll say, oh, well, you were never truly a Muslim. So it's funny how they throw it out and keep it whenever it suits them, to further this idea that you really were, you really weren't, whenever it's most comfortable to say.
Yeah, look, that's actually, I've been speaking with Thaddeus for months now about doing a show on the deification of Muhammad in the Sirah, where you can learn about how Muhammad was born 175,000 years ago. Muhammad is the very first creation of Allah, right? So Allah took a piece of himself, created Muhammad, hung him on a tree, and for 70,000 years, Muhammad worshipped Allah. Then Allah took him from the tree, made a statue out of him, placed him on a lamp, so his light was shining throughout paradise. And for 100,000 years, all of the souls, all of the spirits of mankind, and all the angels worshipped Muhammad. And then Allah took a piece of Muhammad and created Noah, Abraham, Jesus, and all the prophets, David, and sent them to earth. And then Muhammad was sent to earth.
Wow.
And all those who saw Muhammad's forehead became kings. Those who saw Muhammad's chin became wise men. Those who saw the soles of his feet became, farmers. And those who saw nothing became Jews and Christians.
Wow. Wow. That's very interesting.
That's the parts they don't tell you in Islam. So yeah, but that's a longer discussion for another day.
Yeah. It's like...
So Christianity is the worship of Satan, right? So among the former Olympic generations. So again?
I said no, because you said right. So I said no, that's not right.
So they say, who can be better in religion than one who submits and follows the religion of Abraham, which is Islam, because they claim that Abraham is Muslim. Mm-hmm. How could not a person with a minimal reasoning ability he can rely on to distinguish between a religion whose foundations are set universal, being Islam, instead of surrendering to the devil and a religion whose structure is founded on the precipice of shaky mud on the verge of collapsing and dragging with it its owner in the fire? Because we enjoin partners between the most gracious and Satan, between him and idols. They go on to say, right, on a religion whose structure is founded on the worship of crosses and pictures on the ceilings and walls, proclaiming that the Lord descended from the chair of his glory and became attached to the inside of a woman's womb, dwelled there for a period of time amidst the location where the sexual organs join. Then he came out as a suckling, growing up gradually, crying, eating, drinking, urinating, sleeping, and playing with other children. Then they led him to the wooden cross, face spat on. And remember, Jesus, the son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, I am the apostle of Allah sent to you, confirming the law which came before me, and giving glad tidings of an apostle to come after me, whose name shall be Ahmad. Ahmad is the diminutive of Muhammad. I'll pause there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I find odd is that, Muslims use these graphic descriptions of what it means to be a human being. And it's like, yeah, we know Jesus was a human being. Where's your objection? We believe that 100%. And it's just really sad that this is what passes as a good argument, is making human beings sound disgusting and saying that God can't be disgusting like us human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't forget, urine is a big thing for Muslims, because remember, if urine touches you, you will go to the hellfire. There's even a couple of hadith and stories in the Surah where Muhammad finds two men who were urinating, and they urinated on their leg, and they cut off that piece of meat from their leg because they needed to separate the urine from them. Otherwise, they would go to hell, right? Because urine leads to the hellfire. What's interesting, though, is that people drank his urine. But it'll save you from the hellfire. You tell me.
Because he's a deity, I guess. So his urine's special. Muhammad did say that half of the torture in the grave is due to improper urination. So
oh my goodness.
Major obsession of his.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you go
Sure.
on, Atem Yak asked which surah is that referring to, the Muhammad light of the world, 170,000-year-old.
That is in the, oh, good grief. If you give me it later on, I will find it for you. It is in the Mihal wa Nihal, the Mihal wa Nihal. Unfortunately, you're not going to find the entire book. Again, it's not fully there's so many of these books that have not been translated from the Arabic. You can find portions of them referenced in other scholarly works by other scholars. Or if you search for theses written like by people either doing legal studies or doing some kind of doctoral thesis on Islam or religion, if you go through their theses at university, you'll find these references. So Muhammad will lead Jesus in prayer, and this is formally described in the Sharia. So the Messiah proclaimed his name, attributes, traits, and footsteps in a description so vivid that the listeners would seem to be seeing him in person in front of their eyes. Now, what they're saying is that Jesus described Muhammad so clearly, gave his name, described his attributes, his traits, and the path he would follow, his footsteps, the Sharia, in a description so vivid, right? Then Jesus called for prayer behind the Imam, Muhammad, the messenger of God. And Muhammad is, of course, the headmaster of the sons of Adam.
Sounds like what you were talking about with the,
yes.
Yeah.
Jesus called for prayer behind Muhammad, the messenger, and the headmaster. So Muhammad is the headmaster of all of the sons of Adam.
Wow.
Your thoughts?
It sounds like a bit of that deification going on. I mean, he doesn't go into too much detail about what that means, but I just immediately went back to what you were just saying about the piece of Muhammad being created and then transferred and used to create Noah and all these people. Either way, even at face value, it doesn't sound too good right from the jump. So it's very interesting. In the last slide, I don't mean to go back, but I was like, my mind was freezing up on the last time when it says, "And giving glad tidings of an apostle to come after me, whose name shall be Ahmad." This is not from the Bible, right? Is this from the book like itself? I was having a hard time figuring out where this is coming from.
Claim it is. Of course, they make these claims.
Yeah, right? So I was like,
then people didn't have the Bible; they could say anything they wanted.
That's right. And this is actually a point I wanted to make too about the whole idea of not translating it into other languages outside of Arabic. Because what that basically does is it creates this kind of monopoly over the ideology where, I mean, it's just unrealistic to expect everyone to know Arabic. So when, let's say, Islam spreads and people are exposed to it, the only way they're going to be able to know what it teaches and what they have to adhere to is what the figures who brought it to them, the conquistador, so to speak, what they say about it. And so it's kind of similar to what you see like in the first few centuries with Christianity as well, where like a lot of people didn't know and didn't have access to the Bible. And so they just kind of had to listen to the figures. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they're going to say is going to be wrong, but it doesn't exactly encourage that kind of understanding of what the religion actually teaches.
Yeah, the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Agreed. And then he goes on. Yes.
Before you go on, just to be clear, that the Ahmed quote there is an allusion to Quran 61:6.
That's great. We need to make a note of that. Because they fail to reference a lot of these things, and I can't always find them. But thanks for bringing that. I tried to find it. So, of course, Muhammad says that Jesus says, "I would not go away and leave you like orphans. I will come back and pray behind this Imam." Apparently, Jesus said that.
Yeah.
"This is my entrustment to you. If you keep it, the blessing of Allah will stay with you till the last days." May Allah bless him for being such an advisor. May Allah bless Jesus for being such an advisor who foretold the coming of his brother in prophethood, Muhammad. His brother in prophethood, Muhammad, believed in him and confirmed Jesus's prophethood. Muhammad confirmed that Jesus was a prophet.
Yeah.
And Jesus predicted the coming of Muhammad.
I'm pretty sure that's an entire distortion up on the first line in red of Jesus promising the Holy Spirit, and all it would take is just a quick read to see that this is not. But again, this is sad because I can see how people who don't have access to this can just so easily be duped into this. But as you said, and as what we saw foreshadowed in the foreword, we don't see those citations. We don't see those quotes. And then another thing too, it's just interesting to see how they are very quick to put the put the words of Jesus on a pedestal when they want to further Islam, but again, forsake all of the words he said that would completely condemn Muhammad as a false prophet. Again, you see a lot of this tit for tat type of thing going on that just really is not consistent. And that seems to be a common issue I'm seeing a lot with these Muslims, is just a lack of consistency.
Yeah, when they talk about the Bible being corrupted, we're seeing it right here.
Yeah, they're doing it. They're the ones out there like, it's crazy.
Right.
Before you go on, the other thing I wanted to point out is this really contradicts the thing that we hear from lay Muslims today, that all the prophets are on the same level, that we respect Jesus and Moses and Abraham and Lot and David and Solomon, all exactly the same. And it's like, no, which of the other prophets is Muhammad going to be bowing down to? What, none of them? Oh, yeah, even Jesus is supposedly bowing down to Muhammad.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he will lead Jesus in prayer, according to Islamic scholarship. So they speak of the Christians are losers and they slander Jesus. So Muhammad exalted Allah, his creator, against what the Trinitarians, the cross worshippers, said about him, and against the traits of imperfection, shame, and contempt they attributed to God. So humanizing Jesus and making him go to the loo, urinate, be born as a woman, be born from a woman, this is humiliating, and this is denigrating God. So no other religion is accepted from anyone, even if you exhaust all your efforts in it. Allah made it clear and beyond any disputation that Islam is above all other religions, right? It reached the night, blah, 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 the Islamic call, blah, blah, blah. All other religions dwindled in front of it, and many nations succumbed to it, submitted, humbled, and acquiesced.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. And of course, the Christians, now this is a pet peeve of mine because I've actually read the Talmud. I spent 3.5 months as part of a project reading the Talmud. And I know people haven't spent 3.5 minutes reading it that have a lot to say about it. Now, when Allah sent Muhammad, there were the people of the book and the pretenders of faith who followed no book. The people of the book are of two kinds: the cursed ones, the Jews, and those who went astray, the strayers, the Christians. The people who angered God are the Jews, the people of lies and falsifications, of perfidy, deception, and chicanery, the murderers of the prophets, the people of usury. Usury is part of Islam as well, just as a different name, right? It's implicit. In fact, it's explicit in Islam. We did a show on that. And they are the most malicious of all people in intentions, the worst in temperament, the furthest to mercy, and the closest to vengeance. We'll get back to that word in a while. Hatred is their nature. Enmity and bitterness are their habits of machination, lies, and trickery.
This is very interesting. I did a video not too long ago where I referenced a verse where Al-Qaeda had come out and they basically wrote an open letter to a lot of the protesters here in America when they were, they're still in the streets, causing a lot of chaos, but Al-Qaeda basically wrote an open letter to them in which they basically encouraged them to join Islam. And I was going through some verses and just kind of studying to make a video on it. And there was a verse I saw where Muhammad was saying that the closest in love to Muslims are the Christians. And then Muslims will often use this verse to say how, we're one of you, essentially. You don't have to think of Islam as this contradictory thing. But what I got from it was that the only reason he was saying that was because the Jews had already rejected him. The Jews had already kind of seen what he was about and basically said that we don't believe you're a true prophet from God, and they cast him aside. And so the Christians were really the only ones left who might have been more loving. I don't know, but you can even see there how this kind of hatred for the Jews really began to spring up, especially with this entire description of what we see here. He doesn't say too much about Christians, if anything at all, which is kind of interesting. But I don't know, maybe it's just because I guess that would be my question. Why doesn't he really say anything about the Christians? Is it just because the Jews rejected him first, or I don't know?
We're getting there. He has plenty to say.
Okay, for sure.
So moving on, right? In their midst, the most wicked is the wisest. He's talking about the Jews still.
Mhm.
The shrewdest is the most deceitful. The level-headed, who is never found amongst them, is not a true Jew. Among all people, they are the shortest in patience, the most excessive in wrongdoing. To their families at home, they're the most unmindful for cleanliness, the most vicious in disposition. Greeting them is maledictive, meeting them is ominous. Their slogan is indignation, and I think we get the point here. I think we all understand what he is trying to say. Christians are cattle. Christians are astray. The second kind, the Trinitarians, are people who went astray. They are the worshippers of the cross. They blasphemed against God in an unprecedented way. So God judged them as being more astray in their mindlessness than camels, cattle, and sheep. They exchanged the oneness of God by joining partners to him. They exchanged true guidance for misguidance, and they rejected the message of Islam and accepted a false belief. The illusioned abandoners accepted the cross and idols as gods, Trinitarian as a faith, rejection as a religion, and the path of misguidance and indignation as a direction. So I'll pause there. Your thoughts?
Man, it's just so, one thing I've been really getting into the habit of asking, especially to Muslims who believe that there was this kind of great shift, is to show me one verse in the Old Testament where it says that God is one person. The first thing they'll do is go to Exodus, where he's saying to Moses, "Behold, the Lord our God is one." I'm like, there's nothing in that to indicate that he was one person in addition to only being one being. And once
Well,
you do that,
the term, I believe the old term is echad, which means a unity.
Yeah. So it really does come from reading it at this face value, not looking at the language, the meaning, the context, and all these things, and then from that we see this sprouting of a kind of, oh, you Christians who believe in the Trinity are therefore apostates, or you're those who've gone astray because you're stemming from what's taught in the Old Testament. But it's all built on this faulty assumption that what was taught in the Old Testament is contrary to what we believe. And the key is really just to walk them through that and hope they'll listen. But
the whole point of Islamic doctrine is to lead Muslims away from actually reading the Bible and actually reading it. It's interpreted for them. They're told what to think. They haven't actually read it themselves. And it misleads them with these boilerplate template, replies and answers and ideas, false ideas.
Yeah.
They speak of Christianity as a sect, and Mary is in the Trinity. So say whatever you wish to say about a sect, the cornerstone of whose tenets is that God is a part of three, that Mary is his companion, and the Messiah is his son. So Ibn Qayyim, one of the finest scholars of Islam, believed that Mary was part of the Trinity.
Well, kudos to him for at least acknowledging what the Quran clearly teaches. Modern Muslims are like, oh, it's just referring to some strange sect that there's no evidence it ever existed. And it's like, okay, well, why was your God not condemning actual Christianity if he was indeed condemning this strange sect? You'd think he'd be interested in condemning the, say, 3 billion Christians who have ever lived, rather than the 10 people who were in this Mary cult that Muhammad encountered, apparently.
Yep, and they want to imply here that Allah, God, joined himself to the womb of his companion. In other words, incest.
Yeah, this is all built on the assumption that God is like he operates biologically on the same way that we do. So he engages in sexual intercourse and then births Jesus as if it's a literal type of thing. This is all coming from a kind of face value reading where you don't understand the context of it, the typology of it, and you just get these weird views.
They're not trying to be honest. The whole point is to destroy Christianity.
That is true.
Your thoughts, Thaddeus? Anything?
Yeah, I don't really have anything additional to add.
Okay. So their religion is drinking wine, eating pork, abandoning circumcision because that's in the law of Moses. indulgences in adoring unclean things and eating everything unblessed for human consumption, from an elephant to a gnat. To them, what is lawful or unlawful is what the priest decides, and their religion is what the priest sanctions, and the priest forgives sins and salvages them from hell.
Yeah, there's a lot here in this one. One, we see this, you're bad people because you eat pork, constantly in the comments. Occasionally alcohol, but especially pork, over and over again. It's like, you Christians are unclean, you eat pork. Why do you eat pork? You're bad at it, blah, 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 blah. Pork, pork, pork. And
Yeah.
I think that happens because, I mean, compared to most of the laws, eating pork is something that, not eating pork, I mean, is something exceptionally easy to do. So it's like, well, this is something that makes me distinctively Muslim and is easy, so I'm going to harp on that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we could go into the defense of eating pork, obviously, from the New Testament. However, what's interesting is that this level of argumentation is barely above that of the illiterate people in the YouTube comment section.
Wow,
this is one of their finest scholars. This is one of their finest scholars, one of the finest scholars in Islamic history, and this is the best he can do.
And that's why I'm so glad you took the time to lay out who this guy was, because had you just shown me this quote in isolation, outside of being able to guess from the text, I would have thought it was, a YouTube comment or something like that. But really, it's insane because you see how there really is nothing new under the sun. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We're still seeing the same argument, sometimes even more, sometimes at even lower levels, but not much. There hasn't been much that Muslims today have delineated from when looking at these writings, especially considering that's what you said. They're taught these things with Dawah from age 5 and so on. So you can see how it's ingrained within them.
Yeah, we've done, I think, 4 or 5 episodes on Dawah, Thaddeus, right? 4 episodes,
Yeah.
5?
And 5, I believe.
It's incredible. And we should do at least 1 or 2, well, just 1 at least, on what they learn in madrasa from a madrasa manual. And it's really just repetition of the same ideas.
Yeah, we took a look at Bilal's 100 or so page Dawah manual, and really there was almost nothing in it that we don't see in YouTube comments all the time. We're like, surely he makes some decent arguments, but no, it's like the same exact thing. In his section on how to do Dawah to Christians, for example, he didn't have a single positive argument for Islam. He just had things like, well, Christians make the God of the universe become a human being, and that's not possible. And Christians worship 3 gods, and we know that's wrong, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, for them to create new arguments would be bid'ah. That would be unlawful. That's innovation. Innovation is forbidden. So yeah, they say Islam is the only religion accepted by Allah, of which there is no other religion on earth. He likes to repeat this point. Right, the rest are obscure, like a tiny unknown planet. So
before
now,
you go on, I did also want to comment on this claim that the priest decides what's lawful or unlawful, and that's just totally ridiculous. Even in Catholicism, where the priest has a high degree of authority, he certainly is not creating the law. He's just teaching the law. The Bible, whether you're Protestant, Orthodox, Catholic, whatever, is always derived exclusively from the Bible. So that's just nonsense. And then he says that the priest forgives sins, and that is a total misrepresentation of Catholic doctrine as well. The priest only acts as an intercessor, in that he's there to give you more confidence to talk to God, like because in Catholic teaching, it's like God is a little hard to talk to directly. So you're like, all right, I can talk to someone else and God will hear. But it's all the prayer is really to God, and the forgiveness is really from God. So it's just a total misunderstanding or intentional misrepresentation.
I think the latter, but also, I mean, are we doing elephant takeout tonight?
Oh, yeah. Good point. I don't know when Christians eat gnats. That doesn't seem like it'd be
but the thing is, I mean,
thing to do.
But don't forget, Muhammad endorsed drinking camel urine.
What happened to the urine touching your body and all of that? Does that just go out the window when it comes to camel urine and drinking it? Or Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I guess it's only human urine that's unclean. Any other urine's fine.
Yeah, right. So now this section, he contradicts himself here. So I will go through this and I will expand on it later as we go through the slides. He should not say, so when you argue with Christians, you should not say what the incapable ignorant had said. The faith rejectors, that's us, can only be treated with the sword, and there is no need to reason with them. Obviously, this does tell us that there are those who say, don't talk to them, go and kill them, right? So clearly there's division there, right? He says one should follow the bidding of Allah in debating with the faith rejectors after you call them to embrace Islam. That is by producing evidences so that they cannot hide behind the excuse that they were not given proofs. They have no idea what an argument is. They have no idea what logic is. But the sword came, and he goes on to say, well, have you guys seen any proofs being produced so far other than assumptions?
No. So they might have to default to the sword because there's not much going on in terms of the first area. But I hope neither happens.
Yeah. Now he says the sword came to put the proof into effect to protect its implementation. In other words, if they can't implement Islam, then they need to resort to the sword. They have to redress the obdurate opposer, that's us, who stand against the right of self-expression and freedom of speech, right? Yeah, that's wonderful. And a warning to the rejecter.
Yeah, and they were using the sword pretty often, so that says a lot about their ability to use evidences and proofs.
True. And we sent our apostles with clear signs, and we sent down with them the book and the balance of right and wrong, that men may stand forth in justice. And he then says, we sent down iron, in which is material for war. So understand, he's saying, look, you should use your words, but really you should use metal on them too. Understand, this is he's all over the place in this one. He's not clear, but later on you'll see he's like, yeah, go make war, go kill them. The religion of Islam rose through the book and was but defended through the sharp sword. Now don't forget, Islam, if you don't accept Islam, they have to defend themselves from you. Just the act of rejecting Islam is violence. And so it is the remedy of the malady of ignorance. Now, this is a little ambiguous. Is the sword the remedy of the malady of ignorance, or is the Quran the remedy of the malady of ignorance? Not entirely clear from reading the book. Yeah. So the phrase, now he goes on, he says, the phrase, in their hands, swords with two blades, refers to the Arab swords the companions used in conquering the lands, because Islam's religion of peace. And up to the present time, these two blade swords are attributed to the Arabs because Islam's religion of peace. The cross swords of Islam, the symbol on the flag of Saudi. Yes, that is.
I was just going to say, this is one thing that we definitely see every time we look at one of these early sources. No denial whatsoever that Islam is spread by the sword. And, they're quite proud of that fact. That like, well, we have the best and strongest armies because we're the true religion.
And it is known and without any shadow of doubt, that this foretoken is referring to a verse in the Quran, right? Doesn't fit the Christians. The Christians do not chant Allahu Akbar. Allah is great. And the truth is, it means Allah is bigger. The correct translation would be Allah is bigger, referring to a bigger rock than your rock, right? In loud voices. And they do not use two swords endorsed by Allah to revenge through them from the nations. I thought revenge was wrong. A couple of slides ago, he said the Jews use revenge. Now they're saying that they have to revenge. Besides, the Nazarenes dishonor those who use swords to fight the unbelievers. We disparage the Muslims because they fight against people who don't accept Islam. We speak out against it, and that brings dishonor on the Muslims. And among them are those who consider this, the usage of the sword, a source of repugnance directed at Muhammad. We're offended, and we criticize Muhammad because they use the sword to spread their religion. Out of their ignorance and their drifting from the truth, they forget that Moses fought the unbelievers. So did Joshua, David, and Solomon, and other succeeding prophets, and so did Abraham before them. I'll pause there so you guys can
a lot to say there. I think so. I'm just going to go straight for that last line. One has to definitely recognize the difference that we see, for example, within the Old Testament surrounding Moses and Joshua and their wartime activities, because those events were, I guess the best way to say it would be, done in bubbles for a specific time, a specific place, and a specific people.
Specific covenant. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas with Islam, we see a general call to action to wage war against those who do not believe, regardless of time, regardless of place. It's just merely dependent on whether or not they have that belief or not. And so already that's a faulty comparison. And that's what I would say about it. I don't know if Thaddeus wants
they
to.
also denying the new covenant that Jesus brought in. They want to go back.
Yeah, we don't look to Moses for salvation. We don't look to Joshua or David or Solomon or any of these people. They were merely vessels who were ultimately leading to Jesus, who we look to as author and finisher of our faith. And Jesus was the one who said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Do not try to personally retaliate out of revenge or things like that, because vengeance is with the Lord's. And so, not really honest here.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, definitely. I would just, say the same kind of thing, that we see this a lot, where you take Islamic doctrine, for in this case being that all the prophets are more or less completely moral without sin, and then apply it to Christianity and then say, well, Christianity portrays the prophets differently, so it must be false. And, or we see it with the cross, or, whatever, where you say something that's Islamic doctrine, say it must be true, and then Christianity is false because it teaches something different, and it's just a totally circular argument.
Yeah, well, see what the Bible says. The Bible says this, and the Christians don't believe it. So, the Bible is true, except the Bible's corrupted.
Yeah. Yeah, it opens a can of worms, too, because if we're going to start looking to, for example, Moses, if Muhammad had been living during Moses' time, you would have had him stoned as a false prophet, because he spoke of, he never had any prophecies that were fulfilled. And then, you could get into the whole issue of the satanic verses. So if we really want to start looking to them, the Muslims have a much greater issue on their hands, whereas the Christians don't really have one at all. And so, there's not really much thinking in the farther sense. It's just this immediate point they're trying to make without considering the ramifications.
I think this is why Islam, in the current age, in the age of the internet and the rapid growth in scholarship of the Islamic sources, is starting to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time, in the 8th century, 7th century, 9th century, 12th, they could say anything they wanted and no one would know any different. There were very few Bibles around. Yeah. And he goes on, the saying of David.
Before you go on real quick, Nwasi pointed out that the Quran says the only one who is free from sin is Jesus. And I just point that out, and he's correct about that. And I just point that out because a lot of times Islamic popular doctrine contradicts the Quran, and they just don't care. They believe that all the prophets are sinless. They believe that Muhammad certainly was sinless. And then you look in the Quran, and Quran commands Muhammad to ask forgiveness for his sins. And it's like, well, what's that doing? And they're like, he just asked in case he ever sinned, but he never really did. or something like that. That doctrine isn't necessarily derived from the Quran, is the point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Right, correct. That's why don't forget the major source of doctrine in Islam is the ijma, the scholarly agreement, the scholarly consensus, what the scholars agreed, not what the Quran says. Right. So for this reason, the Lord has blessed you forever. Carry your swords, O mighty man. Right. So these are supposedly the words of David. Now I tried to find this exact quote and I couldn't. Now for David, the nations fall down on their knees in front of you. And he goes on to say, none of the prophet after David wore a sword other than Muhammad. And in front of him, the nations fell down. So he's saying that David is predicting Muhammad. David is prophesying Muhammad.
That is, so again, I think that this opens up another can of worms. Whereas, are we going to then take everything David did and then say that it's somehow indicative of Muhammad?
Yes.
For example, I'm trying to think of a specific example. The first thing that came to mind was Bathsheba, which actually in a way could kind of reference Muhammad. So I was like, I don't want to use that. So I'm trying to think of something more noble he did that would completely not be any part of Muhammad's character. And I'm sure there is something there, and the Muslims wouldn't say then that, okay, that's indicative of Muhammad. So what is really, I think this goes back to what you said. surrounding how they get these ideas from scholarship and not doctrine. It opens up a can of worms, because I get that it's the scholars saying these things, but who's really able to justify what, where, and how any of these connections or these typologies really do exist? It really does just become this game of, so-and-so says this and another person says that, and there's no real standard to supplement any of these ideas. And so that's how you start getting these crazy things about David prophesying Muhammad, and they have even crazier things, like in the Song of Solomon and all these things. And so it's just insane, because you're right. You don't really see too much of the specifics in the Quran saying, like, here's specifically where Muhammad's mentioned, but you see it a lot from the teachers who assert these things as fact. And so very interesting. That's what I'll say about that.
Correct. And then he goes on, and then Ibn Qayyim goes on to say, either accept the belief, which is Islam, or pay the jizya, or else the sword. Now, if you read about Ibn Qayyim online, they'll say he never recommended the sword. He was such a peaceful man. And he says here, become a Muslim, pay the jizya, or be killed, which is the standard Islamic set of choices. Convert, dhimmi status, or die. And he says it right.
Yeah, and notice how he even gives the backup to even support this, where he says, and this comes in agreement with this saying, and then says, I was given triumph by instilling fear the length of one month's journey. So he's not just saying this in his bubble. He's saying, hey, I'm not just saying this on my own authority. Here's a quote, in fact, to prove that this should be standard.
Yeah, Muhammad says, I was given triumph through fear, right? And that's what he says. And this comes in agreement with Muhammad saying this. So this is what Muhammad said. So So he says, I entitled this book, Guidance to the Uncertain, and he replies to the Jews and the Nazarenes. I divided it into two sections. The first addresses issues against Islam. The second, proved the prophethood of Muhammad, using all kinds of evidences. Personally, I haven't seen any evidence. But
I'm waiting.
And he says, Allah entrusted Muhammad with a delightful and miraculous book. No boredom makes its way to the reader or ponderer. It's blah, 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 blah. He goes on. It enhances faith and spiritual pleasure. It provides prophecies of the apostles and the extraction of Muhammad's undisguised name from the Jews and Christians' books, the Bible. Right? The mentioning of his epithet, right? His attribute and biography in their books. It provides distinction between good and corrupted religions and how they were corrupted. Mm-hmm. It mentions some of the unseemly accounts of the people of both books, Jews and Christians, how they forsook their apostles, and the scriptures of the apostles bear witness to their unfaithfulness and their straying. Besides, it gives a truthful account about those who concocted heresies against Allah. Your thoughts?
I'll jump in here first. First, technically, it was on the previous slide, but this statement that there's lots of evidences and was proved by many evidences, you see that phrase a lot, but you almost never see any attempt to explain what those alleged evidences are. And then, again, kudos to Ibn Qayyim for understanding what the Quran teaches, that Muhammad's name is in the Bible. The problem is, we have Bibles from before Muhammad's day, and they do not have his name in it. They are no different than the one that we have today. So how did the Christians somehow remove this name from all of their Bibles in every part of the world, some of which were not even discovered until modern times? And it's like, do they have a time machine? I mean, I don't know. You can look at the manuscript. You can see there hasn't been something erased where a name was, or a different name written in. It's just really bizarre that Muslims maintain this argument in the face of abundant evidence that it couldn't possibly be true.
Yeah, it really gives off a kind of subtle contradiction here, because in the kind of pinkish line up top, he's saying we're going to use the books to prove that Muhammad's name is within there, and yet, he's not affirming the validity of these books in relation to Islam and the Quran and all of these things. And so again, it really is this kind of pick and choose. Here's the verses I want to use, which are going to support my position. But then the second they start even remotely contradicting anything Muhammad said or what Islam teaches, yeah, we're going to default to the corruption label. He does kind of create a bit of a contrast between the books and the people, but it is hard to make that distinction when, I mean, they already have centuries under their belt of following Christianity and Judaism if you're a Jew or Christian. So I don't know, it's kind of weird.
So he states that we corrupted our books, we corrupted our religion, but those books prove Muhammad.
That's what I'm saying.
It's insane. It's how do you make sense of that? Let's continue. So they talk about, obviously, again, the extraction of Muhammad under this guy's name, and it mentions some of the unseemly accounts of the people of both books and what they are up to. They are the most notorious among people in forsaking their apostles, and the scriptures of the apostles bear witness to their unfaithfulness in their straying from the right path. Right? So now he says that religions are 6 in numbers. 1 is for the most gracious, which is Allah, and 5 are for Satan. These 6 religions are mentioned in a definite verse in the saying of the most sublime Allah. For those who believe in the Quran, those who follow the Jewish scripture, the Sabians, the Christians, the Magians, the polytheists, God will judge them on the day of judgment. So let me see. Muslims, those are the Quran, the Jewish scripture, the Sabians, the Christians, the Magians, and the polytheists. Yeah, 6 of them. So we serve Satan, and we have altered the Bible. Let's continue. Sorry, I'll pause there. Any thoughts?
Well, they would, of course, there's way more than 6 religions in the world, so they try to slot everyone into polytheists. But you look at something like, say, Buddhism, and there's no way you could put that in polytheism. So it's like, here's another example.
And the Sabians, the Magians are long gone.
Yeah, here's another example of Allah not knowing the religions of his creation, apparently.
And I think the elephant in the room too is why would the author want to appeal to the works of Satan to try to prove Muhammad is the true prophet and that Islam is true? Why are you going to appeal to something? Go ahead.
Muhammad, but the Bible's corrupt, and the Bible's from Satan, and Satan's book. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Make any sense. No, you're fine. No, you're right. It doesn't make any sense. So we'll see. I mean, this is going to be interesting,
but the Bible is written by Allah, but was corrupted by Christians. But Christianity is satanic, and the Bible is a satanic book. Whatever. Maybe we're getting it wrong. I mean, So now I'm going to refer to Tafsir Qurtubi. Now, I only have for instance, Ibn Kathir wrote, I think, 40 or 42 different volumes of his tafsir, which I have. Qurtubi, unfortunately, I believe they've all been translated, but I only have volume 1. And unfortunately, I think the rest is either behind a paywall or unavailable, unless you're an academic in that sphere. They have not made it available. What's interesting is Qurtubi speaks very plainly. It's interesting reading. It's really interesting reading. So this is related to what we've just read. He writes in a chapter that says, do not mix up truth with falsehood. A thing is mixed up when it is mixed with something similar to it, then it is not clear. Qatada said that the meaning of the phrase, do not mix up Judaism and Christianity with Islam. So he's affirming what he says, that in the beginning, when he said that, do not call them our brothers of the book, right? The word used for falsehood is batil, which means when something becomes unsound and worthless. It can also mean in vain. The false, al-batil, is one of the names of shaitan. Right? Now, Islam defines itself as the Deen al-Haq, the religion of truth. Judaism and Christianity are the Deen al-Batil, the religions of falsehood, the religions of Satan. Right? The worthless religions, the vain religions. They say that the worthless religions, when we pray, our words evaporate in the air. God doesn't even hear us. Our words are that worthless. So he goes on, and Qurtubi goes on to say, Ibn Abbas and others, now Ibn Abbas, if I recall, was the cousin of Muhammad, right? First cousin. We knew him personally. So said that it means do not mix what you have of the truth in the book, the Bible, with falsehood by alteration or substitution. The Jews said Muhammad was sent, but not to us. Their affirmation of his mission was the truth, but their denial that he was sent to them was falsehood. They were lying when Muhammad said, I'm here, I'm your prophet. Ibn Zayd said that what was meant by the truth was the Torah, and the falsehood was the changes that the Jews made to it. Ibn Abbas's statement is the most correct because it's general and includes all other statements. I'll pause there for a moment, yeah?
Yeah. So again, when he says, Ibn Zaid said that what was meant by the truth was the Torah, and the falsehood was the changes they made to it. Again, we have, the manuscripts from that time and before. So they're very good at asserting these points, but never getting specific as to how, where, and in what ways we see this whole changing going on. It's kind of talked about as this big boogeyman conspiracy, and yet there's no supplementation at all surrounding it.
Yeah, he does try to talk about it, but he says it's very hard to prove. I may have it, but I don't. He doesn't. He provides very little by way of detail. Even Taimiyya tries as well. He barely says anything.
It's all circular reasoning. We don't believe it's the truth, so we're just going to assert it's not, and then you have to believe us. It's all circular.
Correct. Yeah, that is.
We have a super chat from Atenyak. He says, I hope you can use this to buy a drink of coffee. So thank you very much for that. Yeah. Appreciate the beverage.
And don't pick up any elephants on your way out too.
Yeah. They don't. Unfortunately, they don't sell elephant meat in the area, so I'll just have to go without.
How about gnats? Do they sell gnats?
You might have to just go outside.
So now notice they say here, Allah is not attesting that they have knowledge. Allah doesn't say that the Jews and Christians have knowledge, but rather is forbidding us to conceal what they know to be true, in that Muhammad is the Messiah. Right?
That's kind of a confusing sentence. Can you explain that in your own words? I'm having a hard time understanding what that sentence means.
Allah is not attesting that they have knowledge. So what they're saying is Allah, it means that, Jews and Christians have concealed the genuineness of Muhammad as the Messiah. When they say prophet, they mean Messiah, the Shiloh, the Shiloh, right? So what they're saying is, in spite of the fact that we recognized Muhammad as Jesus, as our Jesus, as the correct Jesus, right? We denied, we rejected him, right? We didn't accept him. And Allah is not saying that we have knowledge, that our knowledge of who Jesus is correct. He's saying, rather, Allah is saying, don't conceal what you know to be true. Remember, we are, what's the word for someone who, they call us the kafir.
Yeah.
The kafir is someone who conceals the truth that Muhammad is the final prophet sent to us, that we should follow. We conceal this truth. Understand? That is what we are concealing. So Allah says, don't conceal what you know to be true, that Muhammad is the one you must serve and follow. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing this in spite of knowledge.
Yeah. No evidence, no proofs. Again, it's just this.
But they say like it's in our Bible. Our Bible tells us this, and we deny this.
Yeah, this is getting kind of like, as someone who's like, and I was telling Thaddeus in our interview last week, I was saying, as someone who is, I historically, when it comes to apologetics, I come from more philosophical, I'm all about philosophy and like those deep questions. This is just kind of like aggravating almost, because I keep seeing this lack of consistency and this lack of proofs and evidence.
You're going to see some inconsistency coming up shortly, man.
Oh man, this is just.
Okay, well, so let me continue. You're going to see some inconsistency in a minute.
Yeah.
So he who did not embrace Islam among them had to pay the jizya and was humble. And these two unbelieving nations, Jews and Christians, the people who angered God, the Jews, and the misguided people, the misguided nation who are more astray than a herd of lost livestock. And these are the Nazarenes who are not expected to be better than their predecessors, the Jews. And it is categorically known that all the lines of the prophet all the lines of the prophets believed in the forthcoming message of Muhammad bin Abdullah, and the nations who followed him are many times more than these two lying nations, the Jews and the Christians. Then, where do the minds of the calf worshippers, the Jews, and the cross worshippers, the Christians, who made out of themselves a laughing stock to all wise men through the insipid contents of their minds and by what they attributed to their worshipped idols, stand compared to the minds of the Muslims? Their lying against Allah, their most abhorrent blasphemies against him, their lies about the Messiah, and their adulteration to his true religion, who antagonized him, So the coming of a prophet, so we denied the coming of a prophet whose time has come near to follow him, right? O you, the community of the Jews, he will be sent with an enjoinment to spill blood, to capture lands and women of those who intend to stand in his way. Do not let this prevent you from following Muhammad. Religion of peace.
That's an amazing admission there. That he said, you're called to spill blood, capture lands, and take their women, and don't let that dissuade you. That's all part of Islam. We believe this 100%.
You look shocked.
I just was like, because I was thinking about the previous slide. There was a quick line where he noted how the Christians would be no better than he said the Nazarenes would be no better than than their predecessors, than the Jews. And I'm like, okay, well, just a few slides before you showed us how he was appealing to the early Jews to say that they believed in these things. And so on one hand, he's saying that their predecessors are not going to that they'll never be better than them, but
yeah,
because they're saying the predecessors are just as bad. But then on the other hand, he's saying that the predecessors were the ones who affirmed the things that he's trying to push. So when exactly do the predecessors, the Jews, become Muslim, so to speak? Is it, as far back as Moses, or did it happen later? I don't know. There's no clear.
It makes no sense.
I can't even respond because there's no substance to address. This is just, I don't know. It just makes no sense to me. You can't affirm that the early Jews believed in what you're trying to push, and then in the same breath say that Christians are not going to be better than the Jews and better than the predecessors. Now, he might be talking about the more modern ones, which I can understand if that's what his argument is. But my question would be, when exactly did that delineation happen? They've yet to provide that.
He's going to try and talk about it, but we shall see. Notice that he says, look, Islam should be spread through disputation. And then he says, no, just go kill them with the swords.
Yeah. Same thing as before. The total contradiction.
Yeah.
So
couple more comments before you move on.
Yep.
So he calls the Jews the calf worshippers. I've never met a Jew who's worshipped a cow. And then the Christians, the cross worshippers. And again, never met a Christian who worships a cross. So that's pretty humorous there as well, that he can't address any of our actual beliefs. He has to just make up nonsense and attribute it to us. And we also have a super chat from Marcus Aurelius. He says, have a great day from a friendly atheist. And Marcus and I have been talking a little bit in the chat. When the video is done, I will post a comment, Marcus, and I would love to engage with you more. And then Tatuinen says, well, now Thaddeus and his wife can both have coffee. And then there was some discussion about that in the chat. So very much appreciated, guys. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
And Lloyd, notice this real quick too. He calls the Jews calf worshippers, even though historically, they'd sacrifice the calves. And yet with the Christians, he calls us cross worshippers, and then gets upset that we wouldn't do something like destroy a cross, because that's where God was supposedly killed. And that's seen as like, unclean or dishonorable. So a lack of consistency too in how the terms are applied. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. So yeah, let's go on, rather, because I have 8 more slides or 7 more slides, and then we finish. So hopefully we can chat a little bit. I'll move this along. So Muhammad, then he fought against them. He humbled them. He chased them out of their lands. He imposed the jizya, the tribute, on them, and declared them to be among the people of hell. They are the worst of livestock in the sight of Allah. That's the Christians, just so you know.
Yeah.
Then, if one can tolerate the mischievous deeds of these people at all levels and hold himself back from fighting them, their blasphemies are intolerable and pose more than enough of a cause and a duty to fight them, as one would get rid of a brute animal harmful and wicked by nature. He's talking about Christians. And then he says, they chose to worship handmade pictures drawn on the walls and painted with different colors, red, yellow, and blue. If a dog comes close to the walls, it may happen that it may urinate on these pictures. Yet the makers of these pictures would still venerate them, kneel and humble themselves in front of them, weep and ask them forgiveness, mercy, sustenance, and blessings.
Here again, we have this obsession with urine. It says a dog might urinate on the wall of their church or whatever he imagines these pictures to be hanging in for no apparent reason. But again, I'd like to see one Christian ever who has worshipped a picture they drew themselves. It does sound a bit like the Bible, where it condemns the guy who goes and takes a tree and makes an idol out of it, and then burns it, the other half to heat his room, and then bows down and worships the tree he made, or the tree made out of an idol. But it
Yeah.
certainly doesn't sound like anything we actually do, just things that are condemned in the Bible.
Yeah. And then they tell us that the prayer of the Nazarenes, the Christians, ridicules God. They chose a way of prayer in which the most devoted and ascetic amongst them would consider it no great matter if he happens to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs. Then he would open a conversation with whomever happens to be sitting next to him. And most probably the chat would be about some mundane matters like the price of wine or pork, who won in gambling, what dish he prepared at home, and the like. I have no idea what church he went to where someone urinated in his pants in the pew and then had a chat with the dude next to him.
Yeah, it's just insane stuff.
And then he would interrupt his prayer to talk about similar things and urinate in his seat if he can.
What? Yeah, notice there's no specific citation of anything. This literally sounds like a diary, like a kind of gossip diary about, someone he just wants to rant about because he's got some pent up attitude towards them. There's no scholarship here. This is all just.
This is one of their top scholars, one of the very best scholars in Islam. Crazy, but
I can't. This is something else.
Dude, I can tell you, the first time I read this and the frustration, when you want to cry and you want to scream, dude, you have no idea how ugly this gets. And it's just shocking to me. The first time I read this, I was like, honestly, how can you say these things?
Yeah. All I'll say is that it explains a lot. It explains a whole lot about what we see today too from Muslims. So
yeah, and then he says, convert or else.
Before you go on, Kevin joined late and he was asking where all these texts are coming from. So why don't you
this is from a book called Guidance to the, oh my gosh, what's it called? I've forgotten the name of the
Guidance for the Uncertain.
Oh, yeah, Guidance for the Uncertain in reply to the Jews and the Christians by a man called Ibn Qayyim, who's one of the top Islamic scholars in history, but he was one of the top three, effectively top two, that developed the anti-Christian polemics in Islam. And his ideas and those of Ibn Hazm and Ibn Taymiyyah became formal Islamic doctrine, were actually passed into the tafsir and then became part of the Sharia. So this defines the formal, orthodox, correct Sunni and Shia Islamic views of Christianity and of Jesus, of how they need to hate Christians, of how they need to hate the church and hate the Bible. So yeah. Urinating in the seat. I've never done that. I don't know of anyone who has, but yeah. This is what they say. So people who decide to follow Islam through reasoning and guidance, they have, blah, blah, gone astray. There's nobody left, blah, blah, blah. If you do not embrace Islam today and follow Muhammad, you'll be trodden under the hooves of his horses. Embrace Islam and peace embraces you. He would keep you sovereign over your people, and neither cavalry nor infantry will enter your land. Religion of peace. Say after me. I think that's a pretty clear threat.
Yeah. Notice how they're saying the way the last line is, it makes it sound like it's going to come from some other source. Like, oh, if you don't embrace Islam, or if you do, he will be sovereign over your people, and neither cavalry nor infantry will enter your land. It makes it sound as if he's going to be protecting the people from some outside force, which is going to come later down the line. But in reality, what they're saying is, no, we're the cavalry, we're the infantry, which are going to come right in if you don't accept.
It's the mafia making you an offer you can't refuse.
Exactly, the protection.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is. Kevin Robinson, he asked, is this different to Guidance to the Travelers? You mean the Reliance of the Traveler, which is a Sharia manual. This is a book, a polemic work written by Ibn Qayyim, which basically teaches Muslims what they need to know about Christianity and how to respond to it. This is the basis of their apologetics and polemics against Christians and Christianity. Yeah, peace until you disagree. So now he goes on to say, right, those who turned away from Muhammad are minorities. So very few people turned away. I mean, they are either conciliatory and they accepted upon themselves lowliness, tribute payment, jizya, and degradation, or they are scared of him. So you either accepted lowliness upon yourselves and paid money, or you accepted degradation as a dhimmi, or you're frightened of Muhammad. I thought he was a peaceful man. So the people of the earth fall into three categories: believers in Islam. So, and the true believers in him, Muhammad, believers in Muhammad, the conciliatory, and the fearful. So then they go on. Now, you're speaking about the Jews earlier, Ayo. Now, he speaks about Abdullah bin Salam and the Jews. So basically, he speaks of, now he makes up these stories about a leader of Judaism at the time in the area who knew that Muhammad was the chosen Messiah, right? And he secretly, follows this, but he doesn't want to reveal himself to his tribe because they wouldn't believe him. They might kill him, right? So then he goes on to talk about this story. So this guy that he speaks of, this Jew, this Jewish leader, he says, I profess you are indeed the prophet of God, and you came with the truth. The Jews know that I am their chief and blah, 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 right? So if they know that I have embraced Islam before you asked them about me, they would prevaricate, lie about me. They would mislead about me. So now he tells this story, and when you read it, it just sounds like he's making up a story. Honestly, it's what they call in the military, the US military, an MSU 13. And MSU is basically for making stuff up. Right? It's a term I used to hear in the office quite a lot. So now, anyway, so then to prove his prophethood, okay, they ask three questions. I will ask you about three things. So these wise men, they present their case to the wise men of these Jews, and they say, well, I will ask you three things that only a prophet can know. What are the first signs of the hour of the resurrection? What is the first food of the people of paradise? And towards whom is a child more inclined to in heredity, his father or his mother? And Muhammad, to prove to the Jews that he is their chosen one, replies, Jibril, the angel Gabriel, told me about these things before. And he says, from among the angels, Gabriel is an enemy to the Jews. And then he says, okay, he gives this Quran verse, Al-Baqarah 297, and basically he says, he gives a confirmation of what glad tidings for those who believe. Now that was cut off in the original. I could not find the full sentence in another volume. Okay. So as for the first sign of the hour of the resurrection, a great wind from the east will come out at the people of the west. This is secret knowledge. And the food, as for the food the people of paradise will eat, it will be what exceeds from the liver of a whale.
Okay.
And if the semen of the man precedes the ejaculation of the woman, the child is more inclined to his father. And if the woman ejaculates before the father, the child is inclined to his mother. And then Abdullah bin Salam said, this Jew said, I profess there is no God but Allah, and that you are his prophet. And the Jews are people of slander.
He broke so quickly. I could have made up anything on the spot. He would have said the same thing about me. That's what I'm saying. It all just becomes conjecture, opinion. I mean, first of all, we know this scientifically, we can get into the science, for example, regarding the inclination towards the father or mother. But even outside of that, these answers are just so, where is the supplementation? Where is the standard through which we can compare these things? The Jew's asking for an answer, and he's asking it in such a way where he's willing to accept anything. I don't understand. He's setting himself up to leave Judaism.
MSU 13, man.
Yeah, MSU 13. Maybe it should be MMSU, Muhammad making stuff up, 13. But yeah, it's crazy.
Dude, So the food the people of paradise will eat will be whale liver.
So I guess whales are from heaven. This is just, oh man.
Yeah. So let's continue. Let's finish up. And then he says, "O people of the Jewish community," he tells them, look, when you read these books, when you read these scholarly works, I mean, they're clearly just making up these stories. Honestly, it just sounds like a child's fairy tale. And he says, Muhammad has brought you this message, and you know quite well that he's the messenger of Allah, and that you find this written in the Torah, his name and his attribute. And now he contradicts everything he said earlier. He is the prophet we are waiting for, and you are lying, they said. Okay? And then he says this, and then they are the people of slanders and treacherousness, lies and immorality. So now he starts to slander the Jews, right?
And looks like Thaddeus, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It just looks like Thaddeus was booted out of the room. But we can keep going, I guess.
Yep. So the most knowledgeable men among them know this as they know their own sons, right? That Muhammad is the chosen Messiah, right? The coming Messiah. And they conceal the truth, which they themselves know. And then he starts to just go back on everything he said a couple of pages ago.
Yeah.
So he says, what is written in their books is often expressed as his attribute, and this is more significant than referring to him by his name.
Mm.
So hold on, he said earlier that his name is in there, but now
Yeah.
he's saying, hold on, but the description is more important than having a name, right? It is well known that in the Quran and Sunnah, it is written that your prophet is mentioned in their Torah and their Bible. They deleted his name because of the issues of the chieftainship and the prohibition of some food. Does it not stand to reason that all of them in the east and the west, in the south and the north, had unanimously agreed to erase his name from the Bible? And there's how the Bible got corrupted.
Wow. Wow. So it's like me going to, it's like if an author wrote some, like, let's say I went to Harry Potter, like to the Harry Potter author, and I said, hey, your books were written about me. And or let's just say, I go like 10 years after the author died or whatever. And I say, hey, the Harry Potter books were written about me. Like, what are you talking about? There's nothing here to show that. It's like, oh yeah, they were corrupted. And it's like, well, how can you prove that? Well, I can't, because everything that was about me in there was removed. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. And also, by the way, my name's not going to be in there either, but you're just going to find kind of indirect references to me, which in reality could be attributed to anyone and everything who has a big enough imagination. It's really just quicksand that they're standing on. And you're right. He went back on what he said earlier about being able to find the name. But once they start to realize that there's no validity there, they have to kind of give a little ground and say, okay, well, let's just be a bit more indirect about it. This alone should be enough to as like I said, I think Muslims, if they're honest, have the capability to really see this for what it is. But people have made the point that if it weren't for the apostasy laws regarding Islam, it would have been a dead religion centuries ago. Yeah, but this is just, yeah.
Yeah, Thaddeus is resetting his internet. He'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
So yeah, then he goes on. But yeah, that's a very, very apt way of describing it. He then goes on to say, okay, such a matter like how we did the corruption of the Bible, how we all agreed, because he says further in the book, and Ibn Taymiyyah says it, all the leadership of Jews and of Judaism and Christianity got together and agreed to scrub the Bible, right? That's what they specifically say. Such a matter is undoubtedly harder to resolve than if it was alleged that they had ignored mentioning his name verbally, simply because it is easier to renege on a verbal word than on a written one. Besides, deleting written facts has more serious repercussions. Such a question dwells on the corrupt understanding that the Muslims himself believe that his Arabic name is literally mentioned in the Torah and the Bible in Arabic, and that the Muslims themselves believe that Jews and Nazarenes all over the world erased his name and deleted it altogether. Not a single scholar among the Muslim scholars has said that.
Wow.
Is that a contradiction of what he's just said?
Yeah, total contradiction. And so it's just getting at the point now where if anyone is honest with themselves, they have to be thinking, is this really the best they have to offer? Is this the best Islam has to offer? And if so, they're not offering much at all. Because
no.
I mean, you clearly see how. So, and the whole thing with me is like, if it really is as corrupted as they say, then why even go to them? Why even go to the books to prove it? You're like trying to find something there that doesn't exist. How can you prove it if it really is as far and as widespread as you say? I don't understand what's going on here.
But he further says that Allah does not make this claim in his book, the Quran, nor did Muhammad, and never did Muhammad reproach the Jews and the Christians as such. Now you think, hold on, earlier he said that Muhammad is explicitly described and explicitly named, and then he says he's not. And then he says Allah doesn't say that, Muhammad doesn't say that. And you're like, okay, so what is it? Is it A or is it B? Which one is it? Mm-hmm. Understand? So he's covering all his bases by dissimulating like this. And this is scary. And he says not a single scholar, but hold on, if you go to modern scholarship, if you go to, say, Ahmed Deedat, who's famous as a modern scholar for saying this, he'll tell you, well, if you go to the Song of Solomon, Muhammad is mentioned, Mahmadim, right? Explicitly, they'll tell you. And he's mentioned here and he's mentioned there. And Thaddeus is back. Hey, Thaddeus, did you miss it? Did you see that section we just covered?
Oh, he sounds like he's a bit behind.
Hey, Thaddeus, you're back.
Hey,
There you go.
Hi, did you see what we just covered?
I was watching on my phone, so I have missed like the last minute or so, maybe because of the delay in YouTube. But I've seen the rest.
Okay, well, here he contradicts everything he just said previously. Previously, he said that Muhammad's name and his entire description is in the Bible. And now he says that not a single scholar has said that. Not a single Muslim scholar says that. And he says that and it's false for us to believe that the Muslims believe that Muhammad's name is in the Bible. I mean, he utterly contradicts. At least, am I reading that correctly, Ayo?
No, yeah. I mean, the language is a bit, it's a bit older, so I had to kind of go through it a bit. But yeah, you're saying you're representing him accurately, and so in doing this, he's pretty much destroyed his whole foundation. And you were talking about Ahmed Deedat and how he says how Muhammad's mentioned in the Song of Solomon. From what I heard, isn't that word Mahmedim also used in regard to Ezekiel's wife? So wouldn't
Yes,
that
in fact,
make
14,
Muhammad?
There are 14 references to that, which makes Muhammad Ezekiel's wife.
It makes him transgender. Muhammad's transgender now. You see the rabbit holes we start to go down when we get into conjecture and just, oh, well, it's this big conspiracy and we can't exactly prove it, but here's how we're going to try to supplement it. You really open a can of worms on yourself.
And he goes on to say, neither the companions of Muhammad, nor the scholars, nor the jurists, nor the scholars of tafsir interpretation, nor the historians or biographers have said that Muhammad's name is in the Bible in Arabic.
Wow.
If some layman among the Muslims imagined the case as such, they would have said so, thinking that they were, as such, supporting Muhammad. But he's saying, no, they'd be wrong. But Muslims tell us this all the time, but one of the top scholars is saying you're wrong, right? And he says, bear in mind that an ignorant friend can be more harmful than a rational foe. And such an opinion surged up from the lack of understanding to the Quran.
He just discredited all the scholars before him that have said that his name is in there.
Yeah.
So
but he just made the same claim a few pages ago.
Yeah, that's the thing too. He destroys himself. So in trying to defend Islam, he destroyed Islam because he recognizes that both he and the scholars before him were pushing something that just was not true. So he tries to go back on it, but because the evidence is so plentiful, he can't do that without destroying his own credibility.
Yeah, so then he references this verse. Now, this was spoiled in the original book, so I brought it from sunnah.com or quran.com. Those who follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whom they find written in what they have in the Torah and the gospel. He mentions this. Now, that just leaves me going, huh?
Yeah.
So that's the Quran, right? And then he says, so points out to the name as being mentioned in Arabic in the Torah and in the Bible. This is not the case. Now he goes on to say, hold on, Muhammad's name is not in the New Testament, the Gospels, or in the Torah, right? The Lord stated that Muhammad mentioned in their books in the sense that what is written in the books is about his attributes, his origin and description. He did not state that his name is written in Arabic literally in the Torah and the Bible. More about these mentioned attributes in both books will be mentioned later on in this book. And describing him through his attributes and origin is more significant and reliable than through mere mentioning of a name. Because misunderstanding can fog the identity of a person through his mere name. The guy with the beard, the guy with the glasses and that name, anybody with a similar name could be tempted to assume being him. Therefore, the misunderstanding is the matter occurred because of the anticipation that his name will be mentioned literally in the Arabic. Such misunderstanding is unjustified, and it does not stand. So the commonest rules of identification without any shadow of doubt, stand in contrast to the description of his attributes, characteristics, his mark, and his mission, the distinguished marks of his nation, the time of his emergence, and the like. Much of this account is mentioned in the Torah and the Bible and other prophecies in the hand of the people of the book, as we are going to refer to. I'll pause there, and then I'll blow him out of the water after this.
Yeah, it's so again, they're using. He was just saying how. So for example, we have the Sahih International verse where he's saying that Muhammad's mentioned in the Torah and the Gospel. That was given at that revelation was given at a time in which we have the Torah and the Gospel from that era and before, and yet we don't find it. So again, it really comes back to this issue of, do we have those scriptures? I mean, we can get into how the Quran itself argues for the preservation of the scriptures and how, none can change Allah's words. But even outside of that, just going off of mainstream evidence, we have the sources from that time would show that
I know.
not only is it not there, but there was no conspiracy where anything was removed.
But he's all
And
over the
so-
place.
Yeah,
But
and so
also-
if the go ahead, yeah.
Well, at the time, there were very few Christians in their part of the world. I mean, there were,
Mhm.
but they conquered them. But their understanding of Christianity was not as entrenched as it is now, as widespread. And they didn't have many Bibles.
Yeah, that's true. And
So
so if the
he's
Jews
right.
and Christians, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
I was just gonna say, and so if the Jews and Christians from that time were rejecting Muhammad, it wasn't because there was some conspiracy where the Torah and the gospel that they had been altered in some way, because we have it from that era. It was because they genuinely saw him as that false prophet, even despite, like you said, there being so few of them out there.
Yeah, the Muslims had few Bibles. What I mean is the Muslims, and remember,
Oh, the Muslims had-
they were not allowed to have Bibles.
Yeah, that's true. Wow.
Thaddeus, your thoughts? We've got 3 more slides that I'm done, and we can probably just discuss, and then
Yep.
What do
So he says that if this is a good prophecy, it should have the description of his attributes, characteristics, mark of his mission, distinguished marks of his nation, time of his emergence, and so on. Well, where do we find any of those things in the Torah that is describing Muhammad? Now, we do find many of those things to describe Jesus. For example, his time of emergence. There's a prophecy in the Old Testament that predicts it will be roughly what we now call the 1st century. And indeed, people were looking for the Messiah in that time frame because they knew about that prophecy. But, I haven't even heard a Muslim try to say that Muhammad's time is in the Bible. And of course, he is technically right about, the name not being that meaningful. Anyone can name their child anything. So if you say the name of the prophet's going to be X, well, yeah, a lot of people would probably start naming their prophet or their children X. But we don't find any of these things. So we find ridiculous arguments that, Moses waged war and Muhammad waged war. Therefore, this is a perfect match. It can only be Muhammad. He's the only person in all of history who is exactly like Moses in that he waged war. And
Oh, yeah,
I think
David
sorry
said
about that.
nations would fall at his feet. Well, let's have a look at another scholar, another famous scholar. Let's see what is written in one of the Sirah, one of the biographies, one of the prophetic biographies of Muhammad, which is called Muhammad Rasulullah, the Apostle of Mercy, by Abdul Hassan Ali, translated by Mohiuddin Ahmad. And here he speaks of Ibn Hisham, Ibn Ishaq, which is the first and most well-known biography of Muhammad. Although Ibn Hisham, Ibn Ishaq is the most well-known, and he says other books of history and genealogy give the undisputed pedigree of the prophet. He says these books are reliable, right? This scholar says this is reliable. The most famous, the most influential, authoritative of the Sirah in Islam is the Ash-Shifa, Ashifa, the Ashifa. That's the one they rely on the most. However, he says in Ibn Kathir, Ibn Hisham, Suhailis al-Raud al-Unuf and al-Fusl al-Ibn Faraq, whatever, bear witness that only 3 persons in the entire history of Arabia have been called by the name of Muhammad during the pre-Islamic period. They had been given this name since their parents had heard from the Jews and Christians that a new prophet was to be born in the near future and that his name would be Muhammad. So the name wouldn't be useful because there were only 3 people before Muhammad in the entirety of history that had that name. There would be no way they can identify him from the crowd.
That actually works against him, because if there are so few, then it would be easier to point and say it's a bigger deal. Hey, this
So
person's
the
named Muhammad.
scholars
Yeah.
disagree with each other.
That is very interesting. But Thaddeus makes a great point too, because even if we give them this, and even if we say, okay, you're right, it makes more sense to just look at the attributes, that even in and of itself is not good enough to show that Muhammad's in the Bible, because when you look at those supposed passages, for example, like in Deuteronomy, where it talks about a prophet like Moses, you can even see how those passages just completely falter and do not talk about Muhammad. And so they try to push this argument as if it's going to save them, and as if getting rid of the need for the name will make it easier to point to him in the Bible.
Yeah, but then they say that his name is unique because prior to him, only 3 people in all of history had that name. And
That's
the
what I'm
Jews and
saying.
Christians. And if the name was not in the Bible, how did the Jews and Christians know that Muhammad was coming?
Mm-hmm.
And they insist constantly that the Christians. Now let's go on. Last 2 slides. So the stones and the trees prostrated to Mo and this Christian monk. So when the messenger of Allah was 12, he went with his uncle Abu Talib on a business journey to Syria. They reached Busra, part of Syria. They met a monk called Bahira. His real name was George. who showed great kindness and entertained them lavishly. He had never been in the habit of receiving or entertaining them before. He recognized the prophet and said while taking his hands, "This is the master of all humans." Allah will send him with a message which will be a mercy to all beings. And Abu Talib asked, how do you know that? And he says, when you appeared from the direction of Aqaba, all stones and trees prostrated themselves, which they never do except for a prophet. Heck of a prophet. I can recognize him also by the seal of prophethood, which is below his shoulder like an apple. He had a mole. We have got to learn this. And we have learned this from our books, the Bible. And he asked Abu Talib to send the boy back to Mecca and not to take him to Syria for fear of the Jews. Second last slide. We have one more slide to go. Actually, we're done. That was the final slide.
Going back to the previous slide, he's kind of contradicting himself yet again there,
Yes.
where he's saying that, the name wasn't known. And then he's saying, yeah, but 3 people named their child Muhammad because they wanted their son to be this prophet.
Yeah, this is a different
But
scholar,
the name's
though.
not known, so
Yeah.
Different scholar.
This is a different scholar from a different book, which contradicts
sorry.
his statement.
Yeah.
My bad.
But he was saying that none of the other scholars believe this. So yeah, he was contradicting himself. It's just crazy. I mean, I feel like I need to go and read the book of Romans after this, just to hear some intellect and consistency and just all this stuff. Cause I don't know. I mean, cause before I sat through this presentation, I kind of skimmed through the slides, a bit, and it was a bit hard to pick up on because I didn't hear you, presenting them. But even just looking at the slides in isolation, I was able to tell that there was something kind of weird going on here. And so now after hearing, how you set them up and how you've presented them, this alone should be enough for any honest Muslim to really start asking themselves and the authorities around them, some serious questions about what it is they've been taught to believe and why. Because the level of inconsistency, the level of just absolute butchering of the facts, the citations, so much of it really was just pure conjecture. You could have asked anyone on the street for their opinion and they could have written these things. Nothing authoritative or credible about this. And yet this has been the bedrock of Islamic apologetics and polemics for centuries.
Yes.
So much so that
100 years.
Yeah, and so much so that, I mean, we can, sit here in this, couple hour presentation and laugh about it. And yet there are Muslims out there, as we'll probably even see in the comments, who are dead on this and dead serious about this, to where they will push this as if it's revolutionary. And that to me is just insane. So that's why presentations like this are so important, because especially I'm so glad that you laid out Ibn Qayyim's credibility, because that is just something that needed to be emphasized before we got into his absolute butchering of the ideas. So, I mean, thank you to you for doing that. But I just more so thank him because he's doing more to expose just the ridiculousness of Islam, as well as the reasoning behind it, than we could ever do, because they would just write us off as biased. Here you have one of their own top scholars saying the very things that we are looking at and being like, how can you support this? And so that is, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Kevin Robinson says that text resonates with Matthew and the child Jesus going to Egypt, and also the end of John's gospel for fear of the Jews. Kevin, thank you for that. And that's true. They do borrow and steal from the Gospels constantly. If you read I know about 50 different biographies of Muhammad, the prophetic biographies. There are a few major ones. The Ash-Shifa is the one I mentioned, and there are 2 copies of the Ash-Shifa. There are 2 different versions. When you read those, you find that they plagiarize Jesus completely.
Wow.
It's complete plagiarism. It's shocking what you'll find in there. It's incredible. And we should finally do a show on that. I mean, some of the stories. I mentioned one of them earlier, Muhammad being 175,000 years old. But you should really, man, it gets crazier than that.
Yeah. This is just, wow.
So this is the trees and the stones. I mean, there's stories in the Ash-Shifa where Muhammad grabs a tree by the hand, basically, and he walks several trees into the sand, and the trees and the rocks follow him, and they form a wall around him so he can take a dump in peace and quiet.
Oh my goodness.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I believe you. I'm just, wow, this is It's very interesting.
And then
see,
afterwards, the trees and the rocks walk back to where they originally were.
wow. A lot of this too, this was kind of a side thing, but I think it's important enough to mention is you see too how a lot of these quotes in these texts, you can kind of see how they subtly would deify Muhammad as well, calling him right there, even in that own slide, the master of all humans and all these kind of little titles, which really bring him to that level, I would say, that really
yeah.
would create some doubts surrounding who's really
Get
God.
into the Surah and he becomes a god.
Wow.
Oh yeah, seriously. And it all hinges on the Pentecost verse. Where, all of it is basically, that's the central core. And then Muhammad's deity is built around that whole concept that Jesus will send the Holy Spirit. And that's central to that. And seriously, if you get into the Sirah, you're going to find out just the miracles of Muhammad. And it's incredible reading, let's just say.
Yeah. Thaddeus, do you have anything you want to say or
comments?
Or?
Yeah, I was going to add that, notice how they're attributing this to a Christian monk. And earlier, about when I had the internet problems, we were talking about how that one story was attributed to Abdullah, the Jew. Well, one, it's interesting that they're always trying to put these stories in the mouths of Jews and Christians to try to give them authority, while at the same time saying the Jews and the Christians are really misguided. They really have no clue what they're talking about. And then the other thing I wanted to point out earlier is very interesting that this Jew was apparently named slave of Allah.
Yeah. Oh man. I just couldn't get over how quickly he folded the second Muhammad gave him those 3 ridiculous answers about the whale liver and the semen and the wind from the east or from the west or something. It was like he was just looking for an excuse to leave Judaism. And he was like, just tell me anything and I'll accept it and I'll join. And Muhammad's like, all right, whale liver and semen and all these things. And he's like, I'm in, let's do it. And so it's just the standard is so low and he gets so much of a pass. I mean, not from us, but from so many Muslims that, if we were to swap these type of things and let's say like Jesus was like the one saying these type of things, the Muslims would not rest day and night, because they would constantly be putting pressure on us saying, how could Jesus truly be from God if he said these type of things or behaved in this type of way? And yet when it comes to their own, you see how those standards are just thrown out the window.
Yeah, it's incredible how they accept this as evidences, as they call it. I mean, this is their I'm going to cheat for a moment. Yeah, so guys, I mean, you got to tell me if we should end up here, because we've been here a while, but
I'm pretty hungry. 2.5 hours, so we should probably definitely wrap up soon. But if people have comments or questions they want us to address, go ahead and put those in the chat while Lloyd is bringing up this passage he wants to
no, I mean, just I was thinking of something I should maybe say here. Okay, this, yeah, just I mean, they even speak of when Jesus descends for the second time, the Sharia of Muhammad will be revealed to him through the tongue of Gabriel. Jesus will acknowledge the reality of the Sharia of Muhammad. So Jesus will submit to Muhammad. It goes on and on like this. They say before the creation of the world, Allah took a ray of light from the splendor of his own glory and united it to the body of Muhammad. That's from the Milal wa Niqab.
Yeah, wow.
And he says, thou art the elect, the chosen. And Muhammad said, the first thing which Allah created was my light and my spirit. Right? And then in the Kitab Ahwal al-Qiyamat, Allah creates the light of Muhammad, okay? And he hangs it in the tree, Muhammad praises Allah for 70,000 years. Then he creates the people of believing men and women, the Muslims. He created the spirits of the Jews and the Christians, right? So when the light of Muhammad had praised Allah for 70,000 years, he created the light of the prophets out of the light of Muhammad. And they said, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the apostle, and God created Muhammad, blah, blah, blah. Then the spirits, that's the spirits of all mankind of heaven, okay, went around the light of Muhammad, praising and worshiping for the space of 100,000 years, longer than Muhammad worshipped God for.
Wow.
Then God commanded the spirits to look upon the form of Muhammad, and who saw his head became a caliph and a sultan, who saw his forehead became a just commander, who saw his eyes became one who knows the word of God. And who saw a shadow became a singer and a player, and who saw nothing became a Jew and a Christian.
Oh my goodness. It really does sound like a story, like a fiction type of, movie
Oh, yeah.
script or something. Like, this is just wow.
Insanity,
So at least
right?
that commenter got the source now. They can see where that comes
Yeah.
from. And
So that's it from me. I mean, yeah, thanks, guys.
that was a great presentation, Lloyd. Very thorough, very clear, but very, you went for the jugular, which was very, very good. You didn't
That's
spare
the
any
only way to
words.
kill a circus. You go for the jugular.
No mercy, but very good work. I really enjoyed it. I learned a whole lot, and I'm very thankful I was able to offer my 2 cents as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
A couple comments I wanted to address from the chat. Earlier, someone, and I lost the thing, but someone, whoever that was, good job, said that the name Muhammad or Ahmed is not found in any of the Gnostic Gospels either, which I thought was really a smart reference there, in that the Quran mostly copies from the Gnostic Gospels. It doesn't know the real thing. So, it's not found there either. Very good. There was some chat earlier about apparently Ali Dawa released a video with a couple other prominent Muslims, including Muhammad Hijab, talking about how it's perfectly good to kill apostates, and that kind of a warning to anyone who, is fans of them, who might be thinking about apostatizing, that, keep in mind, we got a death penalty, guys, and we might carry that out.
Yeah, I think he was referencing that to Apostate Prophet, because he's been in a kind of beef with them. And he was basically saying, like, we've got eyes on you. And he's like, if Islam ever gains that foothold and we get into stage 3 of jihad, then just know you're at the top of our list. Just really crazy stuff, And then Hijab with his old golden. There you go with the whole urination thing. Hijab was telling David, I think, David Wood, he was saying like, he was telling Apostate Prophet, you get a golden shower from David and things like that. So there you go with that urination of. I don't know what's going on with that, but it's really just sad.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of references to that. Look, I have very detailed notes on the subject, but I'd have to look. It would take me a moment to look through my database. But yeah, that is we can have a show about it. I mean, I don't want to be a whole night, but yeah, I have collected my database is enormous. I've collected together all of these different aspects of Muhammad. But Thaddeus, this, how many show ideas have we spoken about that we had no time to get to?
Yeah, many.
Dozens at this point, but I don't know, which should we do next? Ayo, I really enjoyed your presence here. Would you be willing to join us in the future for other
course, definitely
conversations? I appreciate the input. And what would be a good follow-up topic? I mean, Sharia, or talk about Muhammad. The Muhammad people don't know from the primary sources.
I'm honestly cool about talking about Muhammad, because with all of this emphasis that, these sources are putting on him, being praised for 100,000 years and all of these things, I say, why don't we really find out who this guy was and really look at what your average everyday Muslim is not going to hear. And I think that'll be something that'll be very eye-opening. Sharia would be just as good too, but this is just my preference, so I'm just speaking on that. But
yeah, I think we've said a couple times that we would be doing the Muhammad You Never Knew show coming up soon. So let's make it real this time. Let's do that one next.
Cool.
Okay, yeah.
More details and all that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Stay tuned for an announcement. I'll work it out with these guys, and then we'll make an announcement about that. Another announcement I wanted to make is that I will be having a live stream with Ramin Parsa soon, ex-Muslim apostate from Iran. Pretty well known. He's got a pretty large following, so pretty excited to have him on and share his testimony. That should be really good. Look for that coming up possibly by the end of this week. Still have to work out the exact time. I'll have I'm finally completing my video that I recorded like a month ago and then got really busy, which will be looking at the first in my series on so-called scientific miracles in the Quran. The series will be addressing a video made by Merciful Servant that has close to 2 million views. So it's an extremely popular video. The arguments they make are a bit silly, but I'm going to, usually when this subject comes up, the Christian critic points out, obvious scientific errors in the Quran, which is a perfectly valid strategy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take their claims seriously and then see if the Quran actually says what they claim it says, see if it's actually scientifically accurate. So look for that coming up within the next few days as well. You guys have any announcements you'd like to make?
No, I'm good. I just say, yeah, definitely check out my channel. Subscribe, check out my videos. I'm nearing 1,000, which is pretty cool. So hoping I can reach that soon. But yeah, I just want to thank you guys for having me on again today. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on for that interview last week. And yeah, I just look forward to doing more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know. I actually do a lot of research. I read these books. I cross-reference them. I am a little obsessive about making notes, cross-referencing, and examining these things in detail, doing research. And yeah, I find it more comfortable doing these kind of panel discussions than doing it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why I'm really glad to be part of the effort with Thaddeus and yourself like this. Yeah, Thaddeus and I've really enjoyed that collaboration. So yeah, there's so much. I've prepared probably 24 different presentations already. I just need to give them.
Yeah, awesome. Lots of ammunition. Good stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
So, yep, stay tuned for announcements about future videos. And thank you for watching, everyone, today. Whether your day is just beginning or is coming to an end, have a great rest of your day. God bless, and thanks for watching.